Transportation Commission meeting for November 30th, 2022 to order. Stefan, if you could read the instructions, please.
Yep. All right, welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Aiden, if you would call a roll, please.
Sure thing. So Ann Kovich.
Here.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
Robbie Weber.
Here.
Patricia Bennett.
Here.
Bridget Brown. I don't see yet. And Harold Cleams.
Here.
And then Charles Miadzi, Barbara Harrington McKinney, Chris McCahill, and Darren Wozniewski are all excused.
Okay. So Harold, you're good to vote all night. We have several people who are gone. Okay. Did everybody have an opportunity to look at the minutes? And we would be including in this review the minutes from the October 26th, 2022 meeting and the November 9th public hearing meeting. Everybody have a chance to review the minutes? Bill?
I'll make a motion to approve the October 26th and the November 9th minutes for the Transportation Commission meetings.
Okay, thank you. Robbie, is that a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Bill, your hand is still up. Is that for discussion or is that from the motion? Oh, okay. All right, seeing no hands, I'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion is carried. Do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay. How about disclosures or recusals this evening? Okay, seeing no hands. All right, the first item we have, item 2, relates to the paratransit services resolution. Justin, you want to make a brief presentation?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
So this one is relatively routine. However, just because of the dollar amount, we decided to pull it off the consent agenda. So we use a contracted service model, really what's called a brokered service model for our paratransit service, which means we have multiple contractors that provide the service. And we at Metro take the booking from the customer and then we assign them out to the different contractors. We originally started with 3 contractors when this current phase of contract started several years ago. Since that time, one of them has dropped off because of COVID. They basically abandoned their contract. And now that ridership is starting to return, we did have a need for a third vendor. And obviously the contract structure or the wage structures for vendors have changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. And so the current contracts expire in late 2023, but because of the stress that we were seeing, we decided to kind of move that up a little bit and re-procure now. And so we're presenting to you 3 new actually 2 incumbent vendors as well as a third new vendor to provide that paratransit service to hopefully put them on a bit more stable financial footing and as well as add some capacity for us to provide that service. And so some of the details are in the memo that's attached to the item. And you can see, I mean, it is a fairly substantial cost increase. We anticipated this. We've known this for a long time, that our next contract is going to be quite a bit higher. And so all of that is incorporated into our 2023 budget. So, but I'm happy to talk over any questions you might have.
Denise, go ahead.
Justin, just curious about how vendors are evaluated. I suspect the vendor that abandoned contract may be, one of the ones that many riders had concerns about, both as an employer who has a number of folks who use paratransit, and advocate in the community. Certainly, certain subcontractor or contractors have better reputation for quality of service, customer service, than others. And so I have no objection at all to these to this agreement. Just really curious about evaluation and accountability of those providers.
Yeah, so certainly the contract will reinforce our ability to, enforce standards of quality on the vendors. To be honest, some of the challenges that I think the current vendors have had in the recent, especially this past year, has been because there was only two of them. They were stretched too thin, and sometimes providing, or we were asking them to provide more rides than they were really comfortable with, and so that permeated into their quality of their service. And so I think certainly for many of the complaints that we've heard around on-time performance and late pickups and long travel times, adding this third vendor in will help dramatically. Now, there certainly are from time to time, complaints that aren't related to that, just, drivers being rude or equipment being in poor quality, things like that. And we certainly will continue to and hopefully enhance our enforcement of that going forward as we kind of get past some of these immediate issues of just getting the service on the street. That's unfortunately been bogging us down.
Why do you have your headset? Thanks for that.
Harold, go ahead. That was all you had, Denise? Yeah, okay. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Only a question about the length of the contract. So it's 2.5 years and 2 one-year options, if I see that right. Is that the way you usually structure these contracts? The reason I'm asking is, as the memo says, labor market conditions may change over the next few years. But then I think we've heard some discussions around the demand for paratransit after the network redesign. And so I'm trying to think about this 2.5 years. I think that sounds like a decent, you have to have a certain minimum length, but it also gives us the option to reassess our options then. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So we're not obligated to exercise that option. But yeah, something less than 2.5 years would be, difficult for them to commit to and hire people for and, potentially buy vehicles for and all of that. So we've got to find the right balance between a length that allows them to make the investments necessary to provide the service while also protecting us to be able to move on in a reasonable amount of time if things aren't working out as we have.
Thank you.
Okay, other comments or questions? Bill.
Justin, which is the new vendor?
So the incumbent vendors are Badger Bus and Transit Solutions, and I am drawing a blank on who the new one is. Quality Transit.
Yeah.
Okay. And I assume that there was a vetting process then when you put out the RFP and so forth. And so forth.
And I'll be honest, there's not a lot of competition. Some of you may have heard actually a provider that we didn't use but that existed in the marketplace. Van Gogh recently ceased operations in conjunction with Green Cab. It was kind of with their parent company. And so there's just not a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
And actually Quality Transit will be a certified DBE for us, a disadvantaged business enterprise. And so they're kind of a newer upstart organization, and they will require some, I think, help from us to make sure that they're successful. But we're committed to helping them through that process because their success is our success, right? So
great. Thank you.
And just a quick question from me. 2.5 years is okay with the providers in terms of the length of the contract?
Yeah, that was what was specified in the RFP.
Great.
And they all responded accordingly.
I assume so, but it's just an odd amount. Usually you'd see 3 years, 5 years. So
I think normally we try to have our renewals in the summer. And this one was just kind of oddly placed. It's just with the changeover in budget year and in the winter, we generally don't like to change providers. In this case, we're not actually eliminating any providers. We're just adding one more. But if in the future we were to make a decision to change it to a new provider, it's better to do that over the summer when demand is a little lower.
Okay. Other comments or questions? I'd entertain a motion. Harold?
Move approval.
Thank you. Bill?
I second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Or Howard, did you wish to speak to your motion anymore or no? Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, that motion is carried. All right. Next, we have adoption of the Metro Network redesign and the acceptance of the related Title VI report. And we also, that's item 3, and we also have item 4, which is the resolution that was referred to us by the council, the direction to implement the Metro Network redesign. So unless anybody has an exception to this, I would like to take up these 2 items together because they really are the same item. If you have any exception, please let me know. Okay, seeing none. So first off, last I checked, we didn't have anybody registered to speak, which I wasn't expecting because we had the public hearing and we told everybody that's when you should come and talk and that we really weren't entertaining any additional public comments this evening. But I just want to double check that we don't have anybody registered on either 3 or 4. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. All right. So rather than a lengthy staff presentation, we have talked about the Metro Network redesign at multiple meetings. We had a very lengthy presentation at the public hearing. And for anybody, I think there was maybe just one person who wasn't able to attend the public hearing, and they watched the video recording of it. So what I believe Justin and Mike plan to do is make a brief presentation, really summarizing the question and answers from the public hearing. So take what we heard and give Metro Transit's reaction to that and to all of the comments and questions that they got, whether it was in writing or at the public hearing. And then after that, we'll move on to questions for staff, discussion, deliberations, and then a vote on both of the items together. So Justin and Mike.
Yeah. So thanks, Anne. Thanks, everyone. So we chose not to do a presentation per se. We actually distributed a kind of a Q&A document that I think spells out some of the answers to some of the questions that we heard in a little bit more detail. And I might ask Mike to just do a very quick, not read the whole thing verbatim, but just do a quick summary of each of the questions after this. But I just want to reinforce with all of you, I think as we did during the original presentation, that the council did vote to adopt the network redesign plan, and that we were coming back to approve some of the implementation details, including the Title VI, bus stop locations, and some higher level schedule details. And so I think editorializing a little bit, but just in your mind, does anything that we heard different from what we heard during the council process back in June? In my opinion, strictly my opinion, I did not hear anything new. Many of the concerns we heard were not about the specific reports or bus stops or schedules. They were about the routes themselves, which was subject of a very healthy and very long debate at the council level and ultimately adopted by the council. So I would just urge you to think about it through that lens. So, but with that, Mike, if you could just do a very quick elevator speech summary of some of the Q&As that we went through. And I will say this is what the general themes of questions or comments that we heard. There may be more detailed things that we missed, but this was intended to cover the majority of things.
Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, we are not hearing you.
We can see you, Mike, but we can't hear you.
Still nothing.
Like if there's a button or something on your headset, that might be something to look at. Or if you have a battery-powered headset.
Yeah, I don't think he's on a headset.
Try checking your microphone input in the bottom left-hand corner. There's a microphone icon, and then there's a caret. You can click on it and select Same as System.
Yeah, still not working. Mike, if you wanted to share the screen, I can walk through it, and hopefully when we get to any more Q&A, you'll be able to join. But so just the general theme, the first two are probably the biggest ones, and the things you heard, I think, the most often were people talking about the Title VI analysis. And so the first one talked a little bit about the actual analysis itself and how it was used or how it was completed. I think there was some confusion by some of the commenters that basically when we used a census block group level, and that's really just because that's the only level of data in which all of this income and racial information exists. And so I think some people were confused that basically if a bus route touches a block group, that entire block group is being considered served. That is not the case. And so in cases where a block group was large, it was only the portion of that block group that was within a half mile or a quarter mile buffer that was considered served. The kind of challenge with that data is that the block group is considered uniform across the entirety of it. So there may be some situations where an apartment building is within that block group and it's being kind of redistributed across the block group evenly, and maybe it doesn't fall within the quarter mile buffer. But that is not widespread. And actually, probably there are more examples to the contrary of that, where in most cases, the higher density housing is along the main corridors, and those main corridors are where the routes are. And so we recognize that this is certainly not a perfect tool, but it is a well-regarded, well-respected method and tool for doing Title VI analysis, and really the best method we have. And that I don't think that there's any evidence to suggest that that uniform distribution of population across the census block group is in any way causing a problem. And Mike, we are seeing your Windows searching, by the way. So the next one talked about kind of the neutrality of that Title VI analysis itself. again, I'm editorializing a little bit, but I did not hear any actual evidence of anyone of it not being neutral. I will say that, Title VI is a core tenet of what we do as a transit agency. We are required to know how to do this. Most transit agencies actually do these in-house. They don't use a consultant at all. We do both because of bandwidth and to create some level of arm's length protection there. We did use Jarrett Walker to complete this analysis. As part of that, they used a third-party software that is, again, kind of industry standard that is strictly quantitative. It's not really subject to manipulation. It kind of is what it is. And so I don't see, I heard nothing to actually validate any concern about that being neutral. And I can tell you that, we risk tens of millions of dollars in federal funding by doing this wrong. So this is not something we take lightly, and it's not something we would make any attempt to steer, because ultimately the FTA will review this, and if they find errors in it, then it will have serious consequences for us. And so we always do this in a very transparent, very objective way. And then, again, editorializing a little bit, but if we did find another third party to do another Title VI analysis, it would not be just a review. This is not something you can just look at somebody else's data and point out things that are wrong. You would really need to do the analysis entirely again in order to have really any semblance of kind of respect in this field. And so we would have to procure and pay another vendor to do this over again, in which case we as the agency are still responsible for it. So we still have to review and approve it. We're still paying the bills, and inevitably we'll have the exact same criticisms of using Jarrett Walker. So again, that's just my opinion, but I heard nothing in the comments to actually validate any of that concern about it not being objective. The next question is around is there a way to, and some of these were heard in the public hearing, some of these were questions that were sent to us after, but one question around the double counting of transfer point trips in the current system, is there a way to correct for that? There are ways, but it wouldn't really be defensible, and we'd have to kind of explain it away. So instead, we tried to be as transparent as possible, show that it was there, but then kind of describe the details of why it's flawed, but otherwise present it exactly as it came out of the analysis. The Title VI analysis compares things to the current effective network in 2022, not the 2019 network. That is kind of a core thing of Title VI as well. You have to you're comparing the change. You're not comparing against some theoretical thing that hasn't existed now for several years. So that is the comparison point. Using the 2015 survey to evaluate the equity effects of the transit network redesign. So this was in relation, I think, to some of the questions where about is it looking just at transit riders? Is it, and are you looking at actual origin destination pairs for existing riders? The answer is no, we did not use that specifically and directly. We certainly used it to inform our planning process that led to the network redesign plan, but we did not use that in the Title VI analysis. The Title VI analysis is quite specific in that it is looking at the entirety of the population, not specifically just people who have ridden in the past. But based on some of the information that's in here, we don't think that survey data is overly weighted towards areas that are farther away from existing or from proposed routes. And actually, we think it's the opposite. More of the survey responses when we looked at it were more heavily concentrated around Park Street and some of the other major corridors that will continue to see service. Questions around it looks at jobs downtown only. No, it did look entirely across the region using an objective third-party data set. And then some questions around the first and last trips chart. So we don't have the detailed schedules yet. It's really difficult for us to build those out until kind of everything is locked down. And so there are not, these partial trips don't exist there. Right now, we basically have just had a chart that shows when the very last trip leaves its start point, but there are other trips that may start in the middle of the route and kind of continue on. We can certainly take that feedback from all of you, and we have taken that feedback from the public comments that were received and incorporate that into the detailed scheduling process. But we don't have that information yet until we've kind of locked down those schedules. There was questions around the lettering system. And particularly are the letters, able to be heard by certain individuals, maybe with some hearing loss. We did take this into consideration in our original plan for the map, and specifically, you notice there is no M or N letters on the map. That was intentional because based on some of our research and some feedback we received from others, those letters were particularly hard to distinguish. I certainly agree that there, B, C, and D can sound similar, and it's not a perfect solution. And really, the new technology systems will be able to have new enunciation systems that will hopefully make that more clear. But ultimately, that is within the purview of this commission. If you really feel that we should go back to the numbering system, that's not a problem. We just felt that the lettering system provided a nice distinction from the existing system. What we don't want a situation is that somebody currently rides the 71 and then the new 71 is a completely different route, but they are considering, well, I ride the 71. And honestly, the existing system uses so many numbers that we don't have a whole lot of numbers left over if we wanted to start plugging in new ones. And so that's kind of why we went to the lettering system. The BRT routes, so they are planned to be A and B in the future, again, unless this commission tells us otherwise. We played around with the idea of using colors for those instead. That gets particularly difficult, especially the A-line splits into an A1 and an A2. It gets particularly difficult to do a red A or a red 1 and a red B or a red 2, that it just starts to get fairly challenging. I do think that we'll use some colors in some of the branding for some of the lines, but not necessarily in their actual name. And then the other thing that some agencies have chosen to do is to go with a completely unique name itself. For example, Sarasota just opened a BRT and they call it the Sunrunner. That's always a bit of a double-edged sword in that it does create that branding that is different from the rest of the system, but then it also makes it feel different from the rest of the system. And so you always need to balance a little bit between how do you want it to be so premium that people think it's a different system, or do you want it to feel integrated with the rest of the system? And so there's some balancing to be done there. But ultimately, our staff recommendation is to move forward with the A and B designation. And then the system map using colors, we are using, if you notice, the line weight is different for most of the routes as well. And we're also trying to continue the line of the route all the way through. So instead of just collapsing on a single road, if there are two routes that share a street, there are two lines going down that street. And so we're hopeful that system between the thickness of the line and that kind of preventing them from collapsing on each other will help. There is no perfect solution on this either, right? We're trying to use the best practice from around the country, but there are certainly trade-offs in all the different ways. There were particularly several commenters around from the Catholic Multicultural Center talking about how their service would be reduced. I just want to emphasize so they have two bus stops. One is at Park and Beld, 750 feet away. That service would see doubled up to 8 buses an hour. And the other bus stop, which currently serves the 13, is about 500 feet away, so only marginally closer. And that would go from 2 buses to 1, basically just because the hourly route now is 2-way and the hourly route in the future would be 1-way. And so I certainly understand that they're concerned. They prefer that 13 route, but the actual amount of service within a very reasonable walk distance there is actually increasing by 50%. Question about the fare system. We are in the process, as you know, replacing that fare system. You all just approved a contract with Mesabi here just a few months ago. It will probably be at least a year before it's in place, but we are in the process of doing that. The 80 series routes for UW will not really be affected by this, except for the Route 81, which currently uses Lower State Street. We will need to reroute that. If you go a little bit more, go up, yeah, sorry. The vision impaired folks that we are trying to send out information well in advance, like with this document, so that the screen readers are able to be loaded. We are working on turn-by-turn directions of everything, so we will definitely be making a very strong effort to ensure that these materials are accessible to everyone as we go through that detailed scheduling process. And then a question specifically around Old Sauk Road, and we do think that we will be able to accommodate this request with an additional partial trip, but again, that will be detailed in those final schedules. So hopefully that was helpful, but I think that is everything that we have to present. Welcome the discussion, any questions or comments that you got, but we're certainly here to answer questions. Hopefully, Mike, I don't know if you want to try your mic again to see if you had any more success. Nope, still nothing. Mike, you may have to exit the meeting and come back in. I've seen that help sometimes. So.
Okay, comments or questions? We've had a lot of material and a lot of discussion over many meetings on the network redesign. So what comments or questions do we have? Bill?
Thanks, Ann. Justin, I had reviewed your response that you had prepared, that you had just gone over, and I compared that to looking at my notes from the hearings, and it addressed all the notes that I had written down, the questions that I had. And I think the one that is perhaps maybe is the multicultural center issue, and while it's not the best, I think it gives them, there's, like you say, a 50% increase in the number of buses. The distance is a little bit longer, but not that much longer. That I think it'll be offset by increase in service. I think a lot of some of the concerns about buses that start, let's say, in the far east side at whatever time, 6 or 5:30, whatever time it is, and then but they're concerned about they're going to get to their schedule, get picked up someplace, 15 or 20 minutes later. Are they going to get to their workplace or school or whatever at the time that they need to be there? And I think that it's a hard concept to give now, because you tried to explain it very well. It's a challenge with half trips in the morning and so forth, and I think that we'll have to maybe take a look at that, maybe see if we can, as you develop your schedules, that is kind of a tweak if it has to be. But I think, hopefully that it's on the table now, and I think your team will try to work that out as best you can right from the get-go. But we may have to look at it again. That's certainly a possibility. But overall, I was very pleased by your response, and how it was documented and what you put there. And I put in my notes, and I think I heard some comments from some of the people who testified about that they were looking for more qualitative, and I disagree with that. I think you try to, doing it quantitative is the best way to go, because you take the biases out. If you do it qualitatively, people will always second guess you or may not agree with you with your determination, your findings. So I think doing it quantitatively is the best way to go. And I think it's from what Harold and Chris of their comments that as they put in to the Legistar that this is the best tool out there and for quantitative analysis, and we should go with that. And I applaud you for going that route. So I think you guys did a great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Justin, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. You mentioned about the schedules and making adjustments. That is absolutely part of the process. We do not expect these schedules to be perfect right out of the gate. And there will be adjustments. I just want to set that expectation for all of you, right? That there may be some issues where travel times are kind of off. And, these are all new routes, and we're going to have to build the travel times for them without really a whole lot of institutional knowledge of historically how long that route has taken to run. So just please be somewhat patient with us, especially June. The reason we're rolling this out in June and then doing another adjustment in August is because we know some of these issues will exist and we'll have to make some adjustments to fix them. And some of them may be, I can't get to work on time, can you add an earlier trip? And hopefully some of those will be able to accommodate it in later iterations.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Denise, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thanks, Justin. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the significant concerns from the disability community, many of which I continue to share. So I appreciate how much work has gone into the process thus far, and Justin and Mike for preparing the document that speaks to things that we heard at the public hearing. I want to note in the document, I know I heard from people in the public hearing from the disability community, and I don't see that reflected in the document. And unfortunately, I think that mirrors the experience of the disability community throughout this process. So I don't have a solution for quote unquote fixing it, because I don't think we even really fully understand the impact that this is going to have on people with disabilities. And it's so significantly beyond getting used to something different. I think, there's just an enormous amount of fear, so as people with disabilities who can't drive, we're already so dependent on our transit systems, and we already have to make decisions about what trips we do and don't make. And it's, because it's just an impossible thing to get there, or it will take so long to get there, or the walk is too dangerous. I've had folks who said that they had someone drive the new route, or where it was anticipated to go, and would come to intersections that didn't have accessible PED signals and were terrifying to cross, or that there was no sidewalk. And so I think the Title VI analysis does not tell us about the lives of people with disabilities. It certainly intersects with people who are economically disenfranchised and people who are of color. And of course, that disability is intersectional, but it does not give us good information about the impact for people with disabilities. And we will be significantly impacted, maybe some people for the better and other people for significantly worse. I know some of the things that the disability community is asked for are, maps, which showing where there's sidewalks and not sidewalks. And I understand because the routes aren't, all spelled out yet, that might be hard. But I think that would tell me a lot about, can I even get to the bus, safely? So I feel like we have kind of missed the boat on attending to one of our most vulnerable populations in this city, our older adults as well, who often are also people with disabilities. And I'm frankly very worried about the impact. I know that we've heard things like, maybe this will mean that more people need to take paratransit. And in my mind, a network redesign, it would be a win if it actually allowed more people to use the fixed route system, because paratransit is not a healthy system. I know it both as an employer. I would be eligible for it. I choose not to use it because I can't do business using paratransit. And I know it from the community, what I hear. And, I already have folks who would be eligible for service in my organization who don't come in for service because it's just too difficult to manage paratransit. So I have, big question marks about Metro's willingness to really revamp paratransit. There's some creative models that are out there with how people are using 5310 money across the country. I serve on several national transportation entities, and I'm inspired by some of the creative ways that that's happening. So I think this is an opportunity for us to do some very important redesign of our paratransit system. And are we also prepared to put the infrastructure dollars in for making our communities more walkable? Because, I've been saying this all along, and I'm going to say it again tonight, is that the dominoes are going to fall, and some of them are going to fall positively, but many are not. And then do we have the infrastructure that's there so people with disabilities can do the activities of our daily life, get to work, go grocery shopping, see our doctors, and visit our friends and participate in the community and not be further isolated than we already are. So, I don't know how I'm going to vote. I'm very conflicted about it. I think that it's time we did it, and I know the redesign has already passed council, but I just still have significant concerns. The other thing that I'll say is that people with disabilities were ready to be actively engaged in this process to help build a new network. We felt very included with the bus rapid transit development, and I feel really good about BRT. We were not well tapped for the network redesign. I thought maybe just my agency wasn't included, but I've talked with other disability rights advocates and service providers, throughout this process. And again, we were really underutilized, and we are the experts on our experience. So I think that some of the frustration and anger that you've heard and we've heard from the disability community is because, again, what ends up happening is that we're not at the table and then we're on the menu. And I'm just very deeply concerned about what impact this is going to have for folks with disabilities and older adults.
Thank you, Denise. Justin, do you have comments?
Well, I guess first, I want to apologize if your group wasn't more heavily involved. I think we certainly did we had a lot of activity around outreach, and there are certainly places that we missed. And so I just want to apologize for that. I think but to your point specifically about the impacts to people with disabilities, I think that is real. There will be individuals and people who will be negatively impacted, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. Our hope is that more people benefit than are impacted, but there are still, those impacts are real, and those people are really, their day-to-day life is negatively impacted, and that's not something that I want to gloss over. So I think with any project like this, there are trade-offs. Our goal is to make sure that we are maximizing the benefits, but with any change, there will be negative impacts. But I don't want to make any of my comments seem as if this is beneficial for everyone, because it is not. But again, I think our analysis, to the best of our ability, shows that it benefits the city as a whole dramatically, but there are some individuals who will be negatively impacted. And that's particularly troublesome for those people when they have disabilities, because their options are more limited.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of my questions were already answered. I mean, as you saw from the document, and yeah, I really appreciate those responses. But of course, as you keep thinking about this, and I have been thinking about this a lot, two more things, one of which I think maybe ties in a little bit with what Denise has said and with something that came up during the hearing, this concern that a lot of the stops are going to be on busier roads, some of which don't have great infrastructure. I think you pointed out somewhere that you didn't get a lot of feedback on the stop locations specifically. And I mean, I tried looking into this myself. And I mean, since there are so many changes, it's really challenging to take that all in and provide specific feedback. But I think the larger question or the task, and this is not for Metro alone, but I think this is maybe something that Yang can speak to as well, is like, as we make those decisions on where exactly bus stops go and which improvements we need to make, that people can cross the street safely as those stops, what's the plan for doing that over the next, I guess, we don't have in terms of improving infrastructure, it's a pretty short time frame to make those improvements. But I think at least coming up with a plan of how can we maximize safety around transit stops so that people with disabilities, but also, just everybody can get there without feeling endangered or actually being in danger from motor vehicles.
So that is definitely a priority for us. We have been, Mike and Yang's team have been coordinating, set up regular coordination meetings to make sure that we're identifying those opportunities and those challenges. We at Metro have been able to set up a budget for those sorts of capital improvements that can help service along the corridor, accessibility around the corridor. And so we do expect to, once we get this planning process kind of behind us, we can really focus on making those sorts of investments. And so I do expect those to come. They will not be in place by the time we roll this out, at least not all of them, but that will be continuously a focus for us going forward. And I know, sidewalks in particular are a bit of a third rail in some, the residential neighborhoods where people don't want the sidewalks because then they have to shovel them and all of that. And so that's kind of a constant battle that I know we have to fight. But certainly that is a priority for us, and we'll continue to push for that.
Okay, thanks. And I think it would be good to keep the commission apprised of once you have maybe some information of like, we have X number of stops. We have out of those, we have that many with where we have concerns, and this is our plan for how we're going to fix that and by when we're going to fix that. I think that's good going forward to see that, this is actually happening. Second question, unrelated to this, with BRT coming, do you have any sense? The idea is with the infrastructure improvements, you will have like things like transit signal priority, faster boarding, and all of that. Do you anticipate that that's going to free up some resources that we can then put into addressing some of the things that right now we can't do because of the limited budget of, like, say, maybe we can run earlier or later buses, or maybe reinstitute a partial line that needed to be cut? Do you have any sense of that?
And that's actually some of the specific reasons why some of this additional budget was created for us. It's the name is capital improvements that allow us to reduce our operating costs. And that could be construed as literally reducing our costs, but I think more, we've been more considering it adding capital investments that can add efficiency for us so that we can spread that service even further. The same number of hours can actually cover more miles. And so that's really the lens in which we're looking through it. As part of that, but that includes accessible bus stops, right? If we can make the bus stops more accessible, then maybe we don't have to have as many of the stops, and we can, speed up service or things like that. So I think that there's a wide variety of interpretations of that, but we can certainly that is certainly part of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Harold. Alder Evers.
Thanks, Chair. One of the ongoing critiques since the very start of the redesign, or when it was rolled out, is the use of data identifying the low-income cohort of the city population being rather heavily weighted by the student population. Could you speak to this again? I know you've spoken to it before, but one of the concerns in the equity analysis is that you're required to do it a kind of a citywide type of analysis. But it seems if you're driving this from a data standpoint, a quantitative analysis without any kind of qualitative analysis that critiques it, it seems evident that we may miss out on how the redesign impacts low-income residents in other parts of the city, even in the periphery of the city that may not be well served, or in neighborhoods that aren't well served. Can you speak to that? And did you do a layered analysis that disaggregated the student population from the rest of the low-income population in a way that would lead us to believe that we have a really good picture of how this is going to impact, say, low-income people of color? And to speak to Commissioner Jess's comments, her concerns about the disability community would suggest that quantitative analysis alone is not enough, that there needs to be another layer of analysis that takes into considerations of the kind of qualitative disparities that people are experiencing.
Yeah. So that's probably something we should have also added to the Q&A. So the short answer is no, we did not distinguish between students and the rest of the population. That is actually not allowed in the Title VI process. We can't distinguish, we can't basically exclude certain groups from making our calculations. And so while it's true that many students are temporarily low income and not generationally low income, that's not necessarily true of all of them, right? Like there are many students that are of color. There are many students that are generally come from generational poverty. And so there's really no way for us to exclude them without excluding all of them. And that's kind of a core tenet of Title VI is that we have to look at everyone.
No, I understand that you had to look at everyone, but the fact remains is that the low income cohort who are identified as students are qualitatively different in all likelihood of the low income residents who live in other parts of the city. Namely that the low income students live in an area that's already well served. So we're going to have a weighted variable that this, high student population who are low income are well served, and therefore the redesign is going to say that low income people fare appreciably well in the redesign, where if it's not disaggregated in some level, we don't really know. So apart from what you're required by Title VI, was there an impetus to disaggregate this so we make sure that we know what's happening with the low-income non-student population?
So we did not. We didn't want to kind of tread into water that might put us in trouble with Title VI, but I guess more, again, qualitatively looking at that problem, we didn't feel it was necessary because I think, and this is something that we've heard throughout the process, mainly back in the spring, that somehow the network redesign was taking service away from peripheral communities and concentrating it downtown. And actually, in many ways, it was the opposite. Service in terms of the number of buses in the downtown campus area is not actually increasing by very much at all. And most of the service increase is actually happening in the more peripheral neighborhoods. And so they're really, if we were to exclude the downtown neighborhoods, I think more likely we would find that proportionally the service improvements in the peripheral neighborhoods actually improve at a greater level. But we did not actually do that analysis because, again, we don't want to tread into territory that might put us in hot water with Title VI.
That I understand. Just one more follow-up question, Chair, if I may.
Sure.
And that during the course of this, whether it's part of this equity analysis or in the planning and ongoing preparations to make recommendations for the redesign, were you able to identify the priority destinations of the kind of low-income residents that we're talking about in a way that we have a really clear idea of how some of those destinations may differ based on income, based on race, based on, a number of factors? Again, I'm just curious if we specifically looked at those folks that in an equity analysis we want to make sure are not left out and really did a good job of targeting their priority or identifying their priority destinations.
To somewhat, yes. So what we did was the initial plan, and Mike certainly chime in if you need to. The initial plan that was originally released in January before any of the amendment process really looked at all jobs and all people, and it was really connecting the largest concentrations. Then we went through the public outreach process where people identified needs and concerns. We developed a slew of amendments that were ultimately voted on by council. And those amendments, when we were designing those amendments, they were more targeted specifically at addressing the concerns that people had raised. And so we used specific data tools that we have, which are limited, to look at actual origin and destination pairs to make sure that the routes were going where people actually wanted to go. And so that was a part of that amendment process. But I will say, our data on that topic is pretty thin, and so it was, it's not widely reliable. But Mike, anything you want to add to that?
I'll just add a few things. There was a lot of qualitative work that we did, and that I'll mention a couple things. We located all of the grocery stores that were sort of full service and lower budget. There was, if you recall, several amendments were related to things like the DMV on the west side, so people can get their IDs to vote and so forth. We had conversations with La Follette High School on the east side and the connections that they needed. So from a qualitative standpoint, yes, we're very used to looking for these destinations that are important. Healthcare facilities were also something that we looked at, as well as concentrations of people with low incomes in the neighborhoods. Just one other thing that I'll add related to the low income analysis is that the one thing that we did is we did that access analysis that shows the access change throughout the region. And so you didn't see just improvements in transit access downtown. You saw transit access improvements essentially across the region. There were a few small points where access was reduced, but for the most part throughout the region, it was increased. When we looked at that map, we were specifically looking for some of the isolated low-income neighborhoods that in today's network are transferring, and sometimes, in some cases, transferring twice to make these trips that they need to do. So those are some of the things that factored in to the work in a more qualitative sense.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time you've taken to answer my questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Alder. Denise, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I know there was a survey done directed towards people with disabilities, and initially that survey wasn't accessible. So I appreciated that there was work done with the Office of Civil Rights to assure its accessibility. It did have a narrow window of time, like 2 weeks once the accessible version was out. So I don't know how high the response rate was. We certainly pushed it out as best as we could to get it into people's hands. But I'm curious how the results of that survey, what was learned and how that impacted decisions. Because I don't know what the survey results said. I haven't been able to find that. And if I've missed it somehow, my apologies. But I can't do a through line from survey results to how that was actioned in the planning, and where we are right now. So if you can speak to that, that would be helpful.
Sure, I can speak to that. So the results of the survey were summarized at the end of the Title VI report. So we have some takeaways that were included at the end of that report. It wasn't a statistical survey. So we got, I think the number of people that responded, I think the number was somewhere between 50 and 100. So we did go through those responses to see if there were any adjustments that could be made. We didn't see anything that was very specific. So I don't believe it resulted in any changes to the plan. But moreover, as we were preparing the amendment specifically, we worked through various known issues to try to directly address some of those issues, particularly on the north and south sides. And so that's where that information can be found.
Thanks, Mike. I do remember seeing there were just a few bullet points at the end of the equity analysis. So thanks for that reminder.
And Mick or Mike, if one of you could send the more detailed ones because it was actually done in the spring before the council process in June. So we'll send you those or point you to that data.
Okay, great. Other comments or questions? I would like to follow up on something that Denise talked about. And I think we talked about this at one of our meetings earlier this year, Justin, when we were talking about implementation and what we would do as we moved forward in the implementation of the network redesign. And some of the concerns that I heard from Denise and from Alder Evers related to implementation. So can we commit to working closely with Denise's organization and other organizations to make sure that they have information about the bus stops and about the safe access that Harold and Denise were talking about, and about the sidewalks, and maybe involve Renee in some of that and Yang in some of that, just so people understand and don't have that fear that Denise was talking about. So that perhaps some of what's discussed is fear of how it's implemented and not understanding that. And it's hard right now, Justin and Mike and Seth and everybody, because we're not quite there with all the detail. So of course people are anxious because they don't have that. So maybe part of how we can address that is by making some of those connections as we go through the implementation process, to make sure that people with disabilities and anybody who has concerns has the information that they need. And I know Metro I can't even count the number of hours I've spent talking with you about all these things. And I know you all have spent a lot more hours beyond that working on this, that you do a great job of connecting with the community and providing information. And maybe we can take advantage of some of these connections to provide information that will help reduce some of that anxiety. Would that help, Denise?
I think it would, and I think that that's an outstanding suggestion, because it is the fear of the unknown, and people with disabilities we already have to live with so many unknowns. So I think so. I think that that's part of what's been an issue here too, is that people with disabilities, it's not only my agency, but access to independence is also really not felt very much at the table. So I think it would also extend some trust building with Metro again too. I think that there's been a pretty significant eroding of trust, and so I think that that's going to need to be rebuilt through active engagement and information.
Go ahead, Justin.
Thanks for that. And Mick is here and taking notes, I'm sure, to make sure that those connections happen. Implementation is a critical piece of this. This is not, the service isn't just going to show up on the street in June. There will be lots and lots of engagement. Mick actually had a new person start this week, an outreach person. We've got an RFP, I think, out on the street now for additional staffing to help with the we call our ambassador program to make sure that we are out in the community talking to people, explaining how to use the new system. Basically travel training for how to use this new system and how to navigate it. So that will be a huge push for us in the spring. Both across the entire community, but especially the disability community, and helping people understand how to navigate this new system. Unfortunately, we can't really do that effectively until we have the new schedules, and then we can't have the schedules until we lock down all the routes and everything. And so we've got a giant chicken and egg problem that we're trying to step through as efficiently as we can. But yes, absolutely. That outreach, that communication on the implementation side is very critical and a major part of our process.
Mick, did you have any other thoughts with regard to some of those connections?
Well, I was just going to mention what Justin said. We just hired a marketing person. We've been collecting all week agencies and groups that we are going to get in contact with. And so people can we're going to put something in our rider alert on Friday, inviting people to let us know if they'd like us to come visit. So I just invite people to send me an email or send my Metro Bus email a message, and we will add those folks to our list. But we are actively gathering email addresses and other contact information so that we can, once the schedules are ready, we can go out and talk to people. And if people want us to come talk in general ahead of time, we'd be glad to do that too.
Yeah. And before I recognize Denise, can I just ask you, Mick, to connect with Denise and get some of those connections that she has added to your list?
Of course. Yes.
Okay.
I'll be in
Great.
touch tomorrow.
All right.
And if I could add one more thing,
Sure.
So I'll be frank too, we're in the process of trying to consolidate and bring a lot of this outreach effort in-house. In the past, we've relied on third-party consultants for our outreach as part of the project budget, or as part of the project, usually under the design as a sub-consultant to the designer. And I think that has exposed some flaws, right? It's not really a coherent, cohesive strategy and relationship building for us as an organization. And so that is an intentional thing that we're doing, is pulling more of that in-house and giving Mick's team more capacity, so that those relationships can be continuous and not one-off things because we have a project here and this project consultant does it this way and another project consultant does it another way. So we're really trying to get better on that front. But I will acknowledge there have been bumps in the past using different consultants on each project.
Okay. Did you have something, Mick, or should we go to Denise?
Just one more thing to add is that we have our one person now, and we're going to bring another person on board at the beginning of the year. So we will have lots of people to go out, at least way more than we have had in the past. So we will be actively getting those folks out starting early on next year.
And with consistency based on what Justin is saying, because it's in-house as opposed to using consultants. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Denise.
Well, I'm super excited to hear that. So thank you, Justin and Mick, for having a more in-house and cohesive, because I think that has been part of the issue, is that, depending on which consulting firm and if they have relationship with us or don't, or they have less disability bias, and it's a wild card. So I think that's the way you're thinking about it is commendable. The other thing, we can talk offline, Mick, you and I can talk about it, is, in addition to just that standard travel training, when you're thinking about the implementation, there's going to be a need for actual orientation and mobility, which is the high or skilled training for people with vision loss to be able to navigate safely. And it is 6 steps above travel training. So I want to just plant that seed that I think that is service that Metro could be offering. And potentially, we can have a conversation about that, but just to know that travel training in itself for particular populations is insufficient for safe navigation.
I can tell you, we took an electric bus out and met with some members of the Dane County Federation of the Blind a couple weeks ago. And so we do have that kind of in mind. So yes, we'd be glad to set up more training options like what you're talking about.
Okay, great. And then the other follow-up I had, Justin, related to what Harold was talking about, what Denise was talking about, and several people over the course of our conversations have talked about safe access to the bus stops, where there's sidewalks, the street crossings, and I know some of that's going to take time. How do you see that piece of the implementation working out? And I know you obviously be working closely with Yang and Renee and others in traffic engineering and city engineering on that. So I assume that's part of the implementation plan as well.
Yeah, so certainly we'll continue that collaboration. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution, right? Some of them will come through street reconstruction. Some of them will come through, one-off projects. Some of them, there'll be a lot of different ways we'll need to approach it. But I think between our focus on it and our having some budget to address some of these things, as well as some of the Complete Green Streets process that's kind of going along in the process with this, I'm hopeful and confident we'll be able to make continuous progress on making the bus stops more and more accessible.
Okay. Thanks. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, along those lines, I think, Justin, you mentioned 2 avenues for that. I think Safe Streets Madison is another possible way to think about this, because, when we set up the process, I'm not sure how explicit we were about safe access to transit, but we certainly had that in mind when high priority walking infrastructure, high priority safe crossings. So I think thinking about how maybe we can leverage some of that funding, maybe in a more targeted way early, like in connection with the network redesign, I think that would be a good idea as well.
Okay, so something to follow up with Yang and Tom and Renee on. Okay, other comments or questions? I would just say I am very supportive of the network redesign. I think there's been a lot of work that's been done. Nothing's ever perfect, and nobody ever does everything that everybody hopes they'll do. And as we all know from our years on TC, not everybody's always happy with how everything gets done. But I think they've done a great job of doing what needs to be done in the redesign. I think they're working with reliable professionals in Jarrett Walker, and I'm very supportive of seeing us move forward. And I'm excited about TC's role in helping with the implementation as we move forward. Is there further discussion or questions before we go ahead? Robbie?
I was actually going to move approval.
Okay, let me say that what I'm asking for is a motion on items 3 and 4 to approve the adoption of the Metro Network redesign, approve acceptance of the related Title VI report, and recommend to the Common Council that the Metro Network redesign be implemented in the summer of 2023. Does that match your motion?
Yes, so I move approval of both 3 and 4.
Okay. Bill?
I'll make a second to that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Robbie, did you wish to speak to the motion?
Not really. I think everything's been said.
Okay, thank you. Is there further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, I will assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no, wishes to abstain, or wishes a roll call vote. Denise, would you like a roll call vote?
I would like a roll call vote. Thanks, Ann.
Okay. Aiden, if you would call the roll, please.
Sure thing. All right. So Denise Jess,
No.
Bill Bremer,
Yes.
Robbie Weber,
Yes.
Patricia Bennett,
No.
Bridget Brown,
No.
I'm sorry, Bridget, can you repeat that?
No.
and Harold Clemes.
Yes.
And I'm going to vote. Go ahead. You have 3 and 3?
Yep, 3 and 3.
And I'm going to vote, break the tie and vote yes. So according to my calculations, we have 7 people here and we need 4 votes to pass the motion. So the motion is carried. Okay, thanks everybody. Obviously there's more work that needs to be done. And obviously this moves on to the council as so more to follow. Okay, thanks so much. Next we have again, we have 2 items, item 5 and item 6, that both relate to transportation demand management. And unless anybody takes exception, I would like to handle both of these at the same time because they really are the same issue. Any exceptions to that? Okay, seeing no hands. Philip, are you going to start?
Yes, I'll share a brief presentation. That works.
Okay.
Is everyone able to see this?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Philip Ritzmacher. I'm a transportation planner with the Department of Transportation. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the Transportation Demand Management Program. So I think the first place to start out is what is TDM? And what it is it's a package of policies and strategies that's designed to increase the efficiency of our transportation system by shifting people away from driving by themselves into other modes of transportation. That's not eliminating the ability to drive by yourself, but we want to level the playing field with other modes of transportation, walking, biking, and transit. This is really important because people are driving now more than ever. In fact, they're driving twice as much as they were in 1970. And we see that VMT, or vehicular miles traveled, is outpacing population growth pretty dramatically. And what that looks like locally is that some of our most important transportation corridors are completely at capacity during the peak periods. And even if we could expand them, which in many cases we can't, we might not want to, because it would make it more difficult to be a pedestrian, a transit user, a cyclist, and it would make our community not as nice of a place to live in. But it goes beyond that. Where we also know that climate change is a very real problem. And if we keep doing what we've been doing, we have some of the worst outcomes. And locally, what that looks like, if you look at this map, in the last 30 years, we've had over 4 inches of rain annually, in addition to our 20th century average. So we know that doesn't necessarily come spread evenly throughout the year. In 2018, we got it all at once. And that meant that we flooded across the region. So transportation is the largest contributing sector of carbon dioxide, and we know that it's one that as a community locally we can help address. So that's one of the main reasons for this program. So the way that we do this is by changing the way that we facilitate growth. Well, that's one of the ways. So traditionally what we do is we have a new development and then we increase the size of our transportation network to facilitate the new trips associated with that development. And with TDM, we flip it on its head. We reduce the number of trips that development generates to fit within our existing transportation network. You might wonder how that works. Again, it's walking, biking, and transit. And this is a fun graphic that you might have seen before, but this is 200 people in 177 cars, and it's 5 lanes all the way across, and it stretches back as far as the eye can see, about 3 blocks back. But you get them out of their car, and you put them on a bus, and you can actually fit them in 1 lane, 3 buses, 1 lane, 1 block. So it just shows you how space inefficient having everyone in cars can be, and how much of our public space and our public realm that we can free up if we get people using other modes of transportation. But we know not everyone's going to take the bus. We expect that with TDM, what we're really accomplishing is getting fewer people to drive and getting more people to utilize other methods of transportation. On the left-hand side of the screen is a chart that shows our current mode share. And what you see is 2/3 of people currently drive alone to get to their primary place of employment, which sounds bad, but nationally it's actually pretty good. But we think that as a community, we can do even better. And on the right is just illustrative of how this could look. Not necessarily what our goals are, but what it could look like. So there have been questions about how effective TDM actually is, and national research shows that the different strategies shown here can reduce VMT by the percentages shown here. So some of the most impactful things are obviously land use policies, but ordinances are right up there as well, reducing VMT between 5 and 15%. And then the other measures that are encapsulated within our program would have offsets as well. So we wouldn't be the first community to do this. There are TDM programs all the way across the country. So we just took a couple of minutes just to see where some other communities were that had TDM programs and found them located all the way across the country. And one that might stick out to you is La Crosse. La Crosse actually adopted a TDM program back in 2018. And our feeling is that if La Crosse can do it, Madison can do it too. So the other one to point out is the UW-Madison. They've had a successful TDM program for a number of decades at this point. It's a model for the country. So there are already over 20,000 employees in this region that are subject to a TDM program, and it's working there. But we've been talking about TDM in our city plans and policies as well. So a TDM is referenced in our comprehensive plan. It's referenced in our transportation plan. The mayor's sustainability vision referenced the importance and need of TDM. And interestingly, it's already found within our land use regulations in a number of places. It's already a requirement. In fact, Madison's been requesting or requiring some form of TDM for over 20 years. The problem is the application of that TDM requirement has been uneven, leading developers to not know exactly what they need to do to meet TDM requirements, and the Plan Commission and Council struggling to determine how much TDM mitigation is enough. So this creates an environment of uncertainty that's really not good for anybody. It's not good for us as the city, and it's not good for the developers. An example of this is Madison Yards, which you may be familiar with. It took over 7 meetings to get the TDM plan approved for Madison Yards. One of those meetings was over an hour long of talking about the TDM program in and of itself. And that's because the requirements weren't very quantitative and weren't easily defined. So that's the purpose of this plan, is of this program. It would easily define those, it would make it an easier program to participate in, make everything very clear, and hopefully streamline the process, taking it away from a committee-led process to something that could be a staff-driven process. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. So when we were thinking about creating our plan, we looked at a number of successful TDM programs across the country, from some of the oldest like Cambridge and Arlington, Virginia, to some of the newest like Denver. And we tried to pull the best ideas out of all of those plans and incorporate them into ours, and ultimately come up with a fairly simple process. First of all, you determine the applicability of TDM to your site. Not every site is going to have TDM be applicable to it. Second, if it is applicable to the site, you determine the specific requirements for that site. And then you would create a plan and submit that plan, and then implement the TDM measures and report out to the city, and biannually recertify that plan. Now, to make this as simple as possible, we created a spreadsheet where you enter the characteristics of your project, and it would let you know if you have a TDM requirement and what that requirement is, and identify the measures. And I'll get to that in a little bit as well. So there are a number of factors that determine the TDM requirement associated with a site. Obviously, the land use. Certain land uses are going to generate more trips and more transportation demand, so they have different requirements. The different size, the size of the land use would generate a different requirement. So the TDM mitigation requirement is proportional to the size of the development. Proposed parking, the more parking that a site has, the higher the TDM requirement. There have been many studies that have shown that higher parking ratios incentivize people to drive to a site alone. And then the location. This kind of hits in 2 ways. And I'll get into this in more detail in just a moment. But basically, proximity to transit would provide some base points for TDM mitigation. But then we also have a modifier system to modify the TDM requirement based upon locations within the city. And I'll explain that and show a map in just a moment. Next, we created a variety of measures with point values ranging from 1 to 10. So there are 42 measures in total, and the point values for each of those measures is based upon the efficacy of the measures in reducing VMT, best practices that are documented elsewhere, the cost of implementing the measure, and then the contextual relevancy for Madison. So some of the measures include modifiers, so that we're not incentivizing or pushing people towards measures that wouldn't necessarily work in specific areas. These measures include transit, car share, and bike share. If you're not within the service area of those services, we wouldn't want to incentivize or push people to implement those measures. And then I mentioned the modifier. Sorry about that. I mentioned the modifiers for the location. So this is something that we heard early on in our engagement with the development community, is that as they were testing projects in the periphery, it was very difficult to meet TDM requirements. And in the downtown area and in our urban core in the Isthmus, it was easier to meet the requirements just based upon the availability of mitigation measures readily available in those areas because of the location. So think locating within the BRT service area, having a variety of alternative measures of transportation available. So to make it more achievable and attainable to receive or to meet the needs of the plan, we've devised this method of basically terracing the requirements down the further out you get. That doesn't mean that it's easy to get the requirement in the periphery, but what it means is it's achievable to meet the requirement. Many of those areas, you have to kind of juggle a variety of measures to be able to meet the requirements. This was a way that after testing a number of projects, we were able to meet the requirement in those areas. And then the other modifier is base points for mass transit. Now this map is changing. It's draft. It's located. It's noted as that in the plan. But the general idea is that in the BRT service area, you would get 5 points for locating within that, 3 points for locating within the all-day service area, 1 point for locating within the peak-only service area, and no points if you were to locate outside of the transit service area. So it's a way of incentivizing development occurring within the transit service area. And then I mentioned the tool that we created to make the process a little bit easier to participate in. So this is the tool. It's a spreadsheet. And basically, you would enter the characteristics of your property, how close it is to a variety of alternative transportation options, and the number of parking stalls associated with your property. And it will generate your TDM requirement or tell you that you don't have one at all. If you have one, the second sheet in the Excel workbook would allow you to select checkboxes that would tell you when you are compliant with the TDM program. So it would allow you to test out a number of different things. Then you would save this and submit this to the Department of Transportation, and that would be your TDM plan. And assuming you make your way through this, you would be meeting the requirements of the program. So a couple of things to know about the program. First of all, it would go into effect 6 months after approval, and it would not impact existing properties unless a few things happen. First of all, expansion of parking. If parking expands, the particular use would be brought into the program. If there's an expansion of the use or a change of the use or a redevelopment of the site, those would all be triggering events as well. I mentioned the interaction that we've had with stakeholders in the development community. We've had numerous. We think it's been very beneficial. We've made approximately 40 modifications to the document and the program itself as a result of these interactions with the development community and the stakeholders. And we think that this actually made the program much more implementable, much more feasible, and we think it'll make it actually less burdensome on all parties. So we really appreciate the feedback and the interaction that we've had with the development community. And I wanted to highlight a few of the changes that have been made to the program as a result of those interactions. First, we did develop that TDM modifier system so that the requirement kind of terraces throughout the community to try to make it more achievable to implement the TDM program across the entire community. Initially, there was a reliance on walk score, and we removed that because the feeling was it could penalize catalytic developments. So the first development in would have a higher requirement than all the developments that come after. Next, we streamlined a number of measures to reduce the complexity of the program and adjusted some of the point values to more closely coincide with the cost to implement some of those measures. And then we developed a procedure for the malls and for other existing multi-use sites so that there is a process already established to ensure that we can incorporate those sites into the program when the time comes. We also developed an appeals process, and this is really important for the Transportation Commission because this would be something that a portion of it would be staff driven. Up to 5 points could be reduced at the staff level if it's deemed to be improbable to actually meet the point requirement. If there's a disagreement or an error, the applicant believes that there's an error or they need additional reductions in point requirements beyond that, they could petition to come to the Transportation Commission and seek additional relief. And that was something that was added at the request of, after working with the development community and finding that it could be difficult on some existing sites to meet the full TDM mitigation requirement. We also clarified a number of the TDM measures and made some of them more achievable by dividing some of them. We also switched this certification from an annual certification to a biannual certification to reduce the administrative burden on all involved parties, and added additional outreach meetings. And then we've added a commitment that after 6 months after the program has been implemented, so that would be 6 months after adoption, we will reach out to all participants in the program to gather their feedback and come back to you all to see if modifications are needed to the program. That would be one thing that would also be within the Transportation Commission's purview, adjusting point values in the future. So then we know that there's been a number of concerns from the development community and stakeholders that would be involved in this. So we wanted to offer a number of responses to both the concerns that were raised and that were emailed out to a number of folks, as well as some of the proposed solutions that were offered. So the very first one that I want to talk about is that the TDM program will only have a modest impact. Many Madison residents work outside the city, and the majority of employees in the city are commuters. And The TDM program is promoting alternative transportation while acknowledging that driving might be the only option for many people. The TDM program in our mind levels the playing field. And it's something that even if we get a modest adjustment in some of those areas, it's going to be a very impactful thing to the community. So imagine there's an employer and there's 100 employees and 10 of them decide to take a bus pass as a result of this program. That's 10% of the trips reduced in that development. That's a huge impact, especially when you think of that all the way across the community. And then it's important to acknowledge that we've been making significant investments in mass transportation. We just spoke about the Metro Transit Network redesign, BRT. These are regional services that connect us to our suburban neighbors. And we're talking about now connections to Sun Prairie, connections to Monona, connections to Middleton, Verona. We're really reaching all corners of the community, and we would dispute that it is not a regional service. Next, we've heard that TDM encourages owners to charge separately for parking, and it could present a hardship for single parents. And again, I want to add a point of emphasis. There's 42 measures in the program, 3 of which are parking measures, and none of them are required. And it is possible to meet the requirements of the program without implementing those measures, but they are the most valuable measures in the program. We will not deny that. We think that they're the hardest and the most impactful. So as a result, the point values are the highest. That said, there are ways to get here with transportation allowances, for instance, where the employer could still pay the parking, but give their employees the opportunity to take that funding for other modes of transportation. So the transportation allowance could be $65, the exact same price as a monthly bus pass, and that could be the price that they charge for their parking. So there are many options here that would allow employers to maintain parking if that's something that they desire to do, while still leveling the playing field and giving folks who decide not to drive or who cannot drive the opportunity to get to where they're going in a different method. Again, parking policies are the most effective, one of the most effective ways of reducing VMT, and that's why the point values are high. But again, we don't see it as something that's going to necessarily encourage all owners to start charging separately for parking. Many employers won't see that as a viable thing for their business model, but many employers are already doing that. And some employers will decide to actually offer additional transportation options to their employees, such as bus passes, as a result of the program. So it could be a net benefit as well. So there are many ways that this could cut. Next, we heard that new multi-tenant employment or commercial buildings are unable to meet the program's requirements, and that there are examples in the TDM program that are in downtown Madison area that are unfeasible. And this is something that we actually we think is kind of exactly the opposite. We actually think it's easier for new properties to meet the requirements of the program because there's some flexibility built in there. There are certain measures that might be easier for a new development to implement that would be more challenging for an existing building to implement. Things such as a room to store a bicycle in, or adding a shower so that someone could shower. That's difficult to add in an existing building if you're space constrained, but in a new building, that would be easy to do. And in multi-tenant buildings, you could actually share those measures between all of the uses in the building. So we think that there's actually some advantages that those new multi-tenant buildings might have over existing buildings. And then there are a number of measures such as shared parking arrangements and adding to the land use mix that are kind of give me points if you have a multi-unit building and you share things between the uses. So we've tested a number of projects and found them across the city to be for it to be possible to meet TDM requirements in a variety of ways, not just with parking measures, not just with transit, but in a variety of ways, which was one of the things that was very important to us. And we've tested them on our own projects as well, including the Village on Park Street, which is actually a very difficult project because there are 4 distinct phases, one of which is just building a parking ramp. And even in that phase where just a parking ramp is constructed, we were able to meet the TDM requirements. So we are holding ourselves to the same standards and finding that it's possible to do it even on our most challenging projects. Next, we heard that most tenants will refuse to take responsibility for TDM or will require a rental reduction, and some owners will decide that they do not want to shift responsibilities to their tenants due to potential fines. And as a result of that, we heard that early on, we labeled each measure as either an infrastructure-based measure or a programmatic measure. So infrastructure being things that the owner could construct, such as a bike rack, a programmatic thing being things such as procuring a bus pass for employees that want one. So there are the two different paths to get to meeting TDM requirements. And we think that helps blunt some of the concern there. It's also important to acknowledge that many employers and businesses already offer commuter benefits perks. And depending on how that's structured, that could be a 10-point measure if it's a parking cash out, for instance. And then as far as shifting responsibility to tenants, that already happens in a number of cases. There are zoning and building and zoning things that are shifted to tenants, property maintenance concerns as well. So we think that is kind of in the same vein as this, that it is possible if an owner wanted to. If they didn't want to, we think that there are other options to get to meeting TDM requirements. And then finally, we heard that, or not finally, but one of the other things that we heard was it was difficult to comply with the TDM program in a suburban environment. And again, we created that whole modifier system to respond to this concern. Suburban property owners are only responsible for meeting 65% of the requirements of a building in the downtown core. And that number came from testing a number of properties and wanting to provide multiple paths to get there. So that number is something that we found to be achievable for a variety of properties across all different uses and with multiple paths to actually implement the program. TDM is going to require a shift in mindset, but it's something that we have to do if we want to meet the goals of the program. And again, we have that appeals process if there are financial or space constraints in there to try to deal with the special circumstances that may come up. And then finally, we heard that the TDM program will apply to existing tenant spaces constructed before the ordinance is enacted when uses change. And that is absolutely in the program. We have that in there because we don't want to create a two-tier system of development in the community where some properties aren't invested in because they don't want to be brought into the program or some properties are never brought into the program at all. We think that could really blunt the effectiveness of the program if existing buildings aren't brought into the program over time. Sub-uses was another concern, bringing sub-uses in. And the concern was that perhaps only sites should be brought into the program when major use changes occur, such as going from an office use to a commercial use, an employment use to a commercial use. The way we have it written is that sub-uses, so within a commercial use, restaurants, retail, taverns, doggy daycares, that's all different types of commercial uses. If you move within those categories, you would be brought into the TDM program. And we think that is an appropriate place to bring it in, a site in, because it's generally when the transportation and trip generation rates and parking demands would change as well, and additional stress can be brought to the transportation network. So this is, in our mind, the most appropriate place to do it. And again, we've created that appeals process if there are space and financial constraints to try to remedy some of those concerns. And again, it's important to acknowledge that many uses are exempt from the program, including employment uses less than 10,000 square feet and commercial uses under 40,000 square feet. So the smaller businesses wouldn't be impacted from this ordinance at all either way. So there were a number of proposed changes that were offered up in an email that went around. One of them was adding a sunset provision to the ordinance. Generally, from staff standpoint, TDM requirements are already found within the ordinance. And I think it's important to acknowledge that sunsetting this particular program would roll back the program, but not TDM requirements. So we would have an environment of uncertainty while the program is in effect and after. So that's one of the main reasons this program is also created, is to remove that environment of uncertainty. The other issue is that the revenues generated from collecting fees related to the applications are to be used to directly support the program. Eventually, the program is supposed to be self-sufficient with the staff funded from the revenues generated from the program. So that would be very challenging to hire someone, and it could jeopardize that whole concept. So we're not supportive of a sunsetting provision. Next was suggestion was to remove TDM program applicability to existing properties. And again, I talked about this, so I won't rehash it too much, but we think that would create a two-tier system of properties in Madison, potentially discourage redevelopment of existing buildings and reinvestment in existing buildings, and would significantly reduce the effectiveness of the TDM program over time. Obviously, in the front end, not much is going to change, but the longer out that we go, the less effective the TDM program would be, because as written, it would bring some of those properties into the program over time. And that would significantly reduce the effectiveness of our greenhouse gas emission reduction goal as well. We also heard that there's a desire to modify the unbundling parking measure to allow for uncontrolled free surface lots. And we think that this would significantly reduce the effectiveness of the measure. So the idea would be that that underground parking could be unbundled from someone's rent, but a surface lot could exist that would be completely uncontrolled. And that kind of defeats the purpose of the measure. We would suggest that if someone wants to submit this, they could submit it as an other unique measures within the other unique measures category and submit a point value that they think would be appropriate. But it wouldn't necessarily be the same as unbundling all parking. But if that were submitted multiple times and it became something that was popular, that could be brought back to the Transportation Commission, and a point value could be assigned to it, and that could be added to the program. And then finally, there was a suggestion to double the point values for certain low value TDM measures. So the measures that were selected and brought forward in the email were some of the lowest impact in the entire program. And it's important to recognize that staff has already worked with the stakeholders on a number of these measures and actually made them easier to implement, and in some cases divided them in half. So one measure that used to be combined, for instance, was having a clothing locker and a shower stall. And in speaking with developers, they said to please divide those. In some cases, it's possible to do one but not the other. So we've done that. If we were to double the value of that, now it's effectively 4 times the point value that was initially suggested at the staff level. And if it's on the periphery, it's almost double that because of the modifier system. So in our judgment, what it would do is significantly reduce the effectiveness of the program, and many existing properties wouldn't have to do anything to meet the requirements. And that, again, one of the things I mentioned early on is we've got to change the way that we're doing things. Otherwise, we have some of the worst impacts from a climate standpoint. And then finally, before we go to questions, I wanted to walk through the timeline. We are kind of in the heat of this right now. We've introduced this at council. It's gone to Plan Commission, where it was unanimously approved. It went to Sustainability Committee 2 days ago, and now we're here. Next week, Monday, it'll go to TPPB, and the day after, it will go to council for consideration. And with that, I'm open and available to take any questions that you might have, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Philip. Before we go to questions, I believe we have registrants. So, Bridget, if you could hold your question until after we hear from the members of the public, and then we'll go to questions. I believe we have registrants, is that correct?
Yep, we do. We have one.
Okay.
So Bill Connors of Main Street, Madison, neither supports nor opposes and wishes to speak.
Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I hope you will ask me many questions, because 3 minutes is far too short of a time to address this complex new program and all the things that Philip said in response to what I'm saying. First, I want to thank Philip and members of Smart Growth for spending countless hours developing a shared understanding of how the proposed new TDM program is supposed to work, sharing concerns and attempting to address those concerns to make this a better, more effective program. We are thankful for the changes that have been made thus far, but there are more concerns that have not been addressed. We know all of the following things will happen sometimes as a result of the new TDM program. Single parents who cannot use transit because they must pick up their kids before and after work will have to pay to park at work. There won't be enough parking places for 2 people sharing an apartment to be able to park both their cars at their apartment building. Restaurant owners in new mixed-use buildings will have to pay their employees not to park at that building. The building owner will not be the one making the parking cash-out payments to the restaurant employees. Commercial spaces in neighborhoods all over the city will stay vacant for longer periods of time. Commercial tenants will choose to locate where they do not have to deal with the consequences of the new program. In existing buildings in Madison that are exempt, and the vast majority of buildings in Madison are going to stay exempt. In buildings in Middleton, Fitchburg, or Sun Prairie, or buildings in other metropolitan areas. Apartment residents will park their cars on neighborhood streets to avoid paying a fee to park in the parking lot of their apartment building. All tenants in an apartment building will pay higher rents so that some of the tenants who want to use transit passes can get them for free. We know all these things will happen sometimes. What we don't know is how often these unintended negative consequences will happen. Let's slow down. There's no need to enact this program on December 6th. People are constantly asking developers, why are you rushing to get approval? Why don't they slow down and get more input and make it the best project possible? The same can be said for this new proposed program. The proposal has been getting better and better over time with input from stakeholders. Let's take a little more time and get it right. If the Common Council feels it must enact the new program on December 6th, that it is imperative to include a sunset provision to ensure that it comes back to the Common Council years from now so that the elected representatives can verify that the bugs have been fixed. Yesterday, I emailed you changes Smart Growth is requesting to the proposed new TDM program to make it a better program. I hope you have read this document and will ask me questions about it. It is hard to imagine why anyone would object to the study part of Smart Growth's first request or the third request, which is purely a technical clarification of the written words to match the intent of the program. Applying the new program to parts of existing buildings when the use or subuse changes will contribute little to the positive impact of the program, but will have a substantial negative impact each time it occurs. Smart Growth's second request is to remove this provision. And the fourth and fifth provisions requests really have to do with trying to make the project more feasible, the program more feasible for large projects, to make more of them be able to happen and not be discouraged by the TDM program. Thank you.
Okay, do any of the commissioners or alders have any questions for the registrant? Robbie?
Yeah, hi, Bill. I'm not sure how long you've been working for Smart Growth Madison, but are you aware that Smart Growth Madison has actually been discussing TDM issues and how to meet them and requesting some certainty on what the city wants for probably 12 to 15 years?
I started with Smart Growth in January 2020, and there certainly are benefits to the new proposal. So we're not opposing the new proposal. There's the increased level of predictability is definitely a benefit. However, this particular concept, our members of Smart Growth have been working on this intensely with Philip and Tom Lynch for more than a year, sharing our concerns, and a number of those concerns have been addressed, but some of them still have not. We had a meeting with them on August 26, 2021, where we had representatives of a number of the major developers in the Madison area, speaking directly with Philip and Tom about our concerns. And some of the concerns I'm talking about now are the same ones we were talking about August 26, 2021.
I understand that you may not be happy with everything that's in there. I guess I was addressing the idea that this is being rushed since the city's been working on trying to come up with a TDM program for 12 to 15 years. And Smart Growth Madison has been involved the entire time.
Thanks, Robbie. Did you have other questions of him? Okay, anybody else have any other questions for the registrant? Okay, thank you very much, Bill. And I did read your document, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. I read everything. Poor Philip knows I read everything in great detail. So comments or questions for Philip or Tom or anybody else? Bridget, go ahead. You had your hand raised before, so you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Philip, Bridget Brown here. I just wanted to ask you if you could provide a little bit more information on the sentiment that you mentioned regarding feeling that some of these policies may be discriminating against single parents. I just am wondering if you can maybe talk to that a little bit more. I'm wondering if it's, has to do with the idea of, multiple stop trips for childcare or something like that. And maybe, how that might be different from someone who needs to stop at the grocery store after work. And you just explain a little bit more what you've heard from folks on that point.
So I think the main idea behind this, and again, this is something that maybe Bill could speak to a little bit more, but I think the idea behind it is that there could be folks out there that have parking now, free parking that they're utilizing, that could be taken from them. And that is certainly, there are many ways to meet TDM requirements. And that's the thing, the point that I was trying to make is it's not required to remove parking from anywhere. It's not required to take that away from anybody. And there are many people who don't have free parking. And in some cases, we believe that what will actually happen is because we're leveling the transportation playing field, they may have other options available to them. But I think that's what the point was gearing at, is that there could be people that have parking that would get it taken away. Or as Bill mentioned, people that could end up paying for it that aren't right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go to Tom Lynch, and then I will ask Bill if he has any other comments. So Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add a kind of a qualification. The TDM doesn't remove parking, right? And in instances like we've had childcare and people, children on soccer games and everything. Sometimes parents need a car, and that is fine. And this doesn't remove parking. What it does, though, is that there's a parking spot that's provided at every business, and that parking spot is worth $10,000 to $15,000, for every spot, and that's given to everyone who has a car for free, right? But if you have a bus pass, well, you have to pay for that yourself. Do you know what I mean? Or you have to, and so this is just saying, well, if you're going to give something free to those who own an auto, well, you should provide the same incentives for those who can't afford to own an auto or choose not to own an auto. A real simple thing, at one time I was a landlord, and I'm very glad that I'm not, but right now. But I had my rents, and I just reduced the rents $50, and I charge them $50 for a parking spot. An employer could say you have a $50 transportation allowance, and a parking space costs $50. So it's really a net no difference to any of the employees, except for the employee that doesn't have a car, which now has $50 to buy a bus ticket, or $50 to help purchase one of those bikes that you haul kids with, or whatever. You know what I mean? And so if you think about an employer with a 50 person employer, right? Maybe only 3 people might choose that option, right? 3 people, where the other 47 continue to drive. But that 3 people is a mode shift of 6%. You see it? That's really pretty significant. A 6% mode shift, just by encouraging 3 people out of a 50-person firm to take the bus or to take their bike because they get $50 or something. So I think I wanted to put that in a little bit more of a perspective. Thank you for allowing me to say that.
Sure, absolutely. Bridget, did you want to hear from Bill with regard to a little more about what he was asking about?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, Bill, do you want to talk a little bit more about you're mentioning the single parents and the cost to park?
Sure. Am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Okay, good. All right. So if you're talking about a new building, there's a considerable incentive to charge for parking. There's 10 points available, and for a large new building, it's very hard to come up with the required number of TDM points without doing one of those 10 pointers, which is either the charging for parking or the cash buyout where you pay the employee not to park. All right. So the program isn't requiring that, but there's certainly a huge incentive for a developer, a building owner, to use one of those 10.1s. And then if the businesses that locate in the building, their employees would either have to pay to park. So if a business, locates there and a single parent wants to work for that business, if they've got kids that they need to drop off before and after work, and trying to do that with bus is, or even, just the part home and to and from home and the work, just that part on bus to get to the car to go get the kids. It would be a tremendous burden on that single parent. If the building owner chose that particular measure, the alternative measure that Tom mentioned is the cash buyout, where the employer basically gives the employees cash if they agree not to park at the building. But the employer, in many cases, is not the building owner. So you have a small business, a restaurant, I used as an example, that on the ground floor of a new multi-use building, they would have to, that restaurant would have to be offering the cash buyout to their employees, not the building owner, because the building owner isn't the employer. And those employees are not the employees of the building owner. So it gets complicated and potentially, not good for a wide variety of residents and employees throughout the city in the new buildings that will be subject to this program. We don't know precisely how many will choose those 10 pointers, but we know some will, because it's really hard to do projects without including those 10 pointers.
I think we were trying to focus on the single parent question that Bridget had. So did you have anything else in that regard, or we're going to move on?
That was it. I did spend some time on it.
You did. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bridget, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, let's maybe keep in mind that the registrant had their time to speak and they are not part of the commission. I have a question about the appeals process, because that seems like something, that's part of why this is in front of us. I've been following the general process to develop the TDM ordinance at TPPB, at Plan Commission. So I think that has been going on for a long time. And I think there have been a lot of good changes. But yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about the appeals process. So the way I understand it is staff can make the reduction of up to 5 points. And then if the developer thinks like they want a larger reduction, or staff denies those 5 points, then they come to the Transportation Commission. And I guess we would be forming a subcommittee, or is that to be determined?
It would be full Transportation Commission, Harold, at least to start with. That's how it's proposed in the ordinance. It would come to the full Transportation Commission. But go ahead.
Do we have any sense? I'm thinking really about the practicalities of that, because I think there probably is an incentive for a developer to just come to the Transportation Commission, because there's relatively little cost to them to ask for an appeal. And so, I want to make sure we are in a position to actually handle that well.
So you got most of it right. I think that the one thing that I didn't add a point of emphasis on during the presentation is that this would be only for existing properties. Mm-hmm. So if there's a new development where there is kind of that longer time frame to come and ask for that reduction, it wouldn't apply to those new developments. They would be required to meet the full point value in the program. But for the existing developments, they could. And I think the disincentive there is one that we've heard through the process, and that is that it's time consuming to come to the TC. It's not as easy as just working through staff and getting the approval that could come through Acela along with the rest of the development process. So it is a significant slowdown in terms of what the normal process would be. So I guess I would anticipate there being fewer than you might expect, because it would be much easier to work with staff or to meet the requirements of the program.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I misread that. Thanks.
I just have a couple follow-ups. Philip, there was a comment that was just made that it's very hard to reach the points without parking. And I've seen a number of your examples, and it didn't seem like that was necessarily the case. So if you could comment on that, as well as the fact that you plan to bring this to TC after 6 months of operation. So there'll be another opportunity to look for amendments, and then probably every year, I would guess, we would be looking at it. So that's just a reminder that this, just like with the Metro network redesign, is not going to be set in stone forever. This is where we're going to start, and then we're going to have chances to look at it. So could you comment on those two things, please?
Absolutely. The first one, reducing parking or having one of the parking measures is easily by and far the easiest way to meet the requirements of the program. It is the highest point value. The three parking measures are the highest point value measures in the program, but they're not the only ways. And it is possible, but you're going to have to do a number of other things. So whereas you might be able to just implement one of the parking measures, you might have to do kind of a series of things to meet the requirements otherwise. So an example, just off the top of my head, of what might be equivalent value, installing bike racks, having a kiosk, letting people know of their transportation options, which would include bike maps, transit maps, potentially installing signage, letting people know where the nearest bike trail is, and then potentially a few other things to meet the same value. But if you think about it, the cumulative value of all of those measures might be the same as not having having a parking cash out, for instance, or unbundling parking. So that's why that value of that particular measure is so high. So it's still possible to get there. You're just going to have to do more smaller measures otherwise. So we've tested that in a number of projects to make sure that it's possible. So it might incentivize some folks might just say, this is the one thing that's easy to do for me, and I'll do that one. But others might decide to do 4 or 5 other small things. It really depends on the particular building owner or employer. And I want to get your second question correct. So may I ask you to repeat that second one?
My understanding is the program would be implemented 6 months after it was published. And then 6 months after that, I think you were going to come back and do a review, and then typically annually after that. Would that be right?
Correct. So if this were adopted on the 6th, it would go into effect June 6th. And then 6 months after that, we would come back to the Transportation Commission. We've said that we're going to actually reach out to all the participants in the program to gather their feedback, to see how the program's going, if refinements or improvements could be made, and then bring that back to you. And you would be able to make improvements to the program or modify it if you saw fit to do so. Annually after that, we would do the same thing. And one of the main reasons why the program is structured in this way is initially all of the requirements were in the ordinance. So to make any changes, rather than going to you all, we would go to the council and need to go through the formal ordinance process to even change a point value of for instance, the value of a car share parking space. So that's pretty inefficient. But with this, We'll come back to you annually at a minimum, but we could come back at any time through the year to make modifications if necessary. So it really gives a greater degree of flexibility. We understand that the program is probably not going to be perfect up front, so we want to have the opportunity to adjust it as needed and make refinements as they come up and add measures as developers come up with some really innovative stuff. We think that it is an opportunity to add measures in over time as well and get out to the broader development community so that everyone is on the same playing field there.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure everybody was aware we're going to have lots of opportunities to look at this. So are there other comments or questions? Harold, go ahead.
I would move approval.
Okay, and if I can clarify, what we need is a recommendation. I would like to have this motion cover both 5 and 6. So working with Steve Brisk, we need to recommend to the Common Council adoption of the Transportation Demand Management Program, approval of an ordinance creating Section 1603, establishing a Transportation Demand Management Program, and approval to amend 3356-5, which is the Transportation Commission Ordinance, as detailed in the revised documents that were sent out today and are saved in Legistar 74423. You good with that, Harold?
Indeed.
Okay. Robbie, is that a second?
That is a second. And after Harold speaks, I'd like to speak to this as well.
Sure. So, Harold, why don't you go ahead and speak to your motion, then we'll hear from Robbie.
Sure. I'll keep it relatively short. As I said, I've been following this for a long time. I think there's been a very thorough process, starting with TPPB, going through staff, going through plan commission. Refinements have been made. I think it's really laudable that we have looked at what other cities have been doing and what has and hasn't worked from them, that we are looking at the research and have the research inform what these point measures are, where we know, like, some of these things maybe have relatively small effect, but they're also cheap to implement, therefore they get few points. There are some that we know are much more effective, but maybe more expensive, therefore you get more points for them. So I think it's overall a really well thought out program. Will we make refinements on it? I'm sure we will. There's a process in place for that. I don't think trying to tinker more with it on the front end is going to improve anything. And so, that's why I support adopting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Robbie, go ahead.
Thank you. So I made reference to the fact that the city's been trying to get a TDM program started for 12 to 15 years. And I know this because I was working on it 12 to 15 years ago when a previous representative from Smart Growth Madison came and to the previous committee and testified about what we were trying to do. Also, I have watched many Plan Commission meetings where the Plan Commission requested that a new development or a change in use implement transportation demand management. And many times the applicant either had no idea what transportation demand management was or said, I don't know what you want me to do. Just tell me what you want me to do. But I don't know how to do transportation demand management. So I think that this is an opportunity for things to be clarified for people coming to Plan Commission. We know the city wants to do TDM. We know that the Plan Commission is going to require it. And now there is a list of things that applicants can choose from on how to do what is already going to be required. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this program. I should also point out that the last project that I worked on at State Smart Transportation Initiative before retiring was basically a report that looks identical to what the city has given you. So I did much of the research that is actually included in that report before I retired. So I'm familiar with how they came up. Well, San Francisco, their chart, if you look at the chart from San Francisco about their requirements for developments, it looks very similar to the chart that the city is suggesting. They have some other things that they've included, partly because they have a more robust, regional transportation system, and they have other things that are included that the city didn't include that count for points. But there's a reason that those point values are there, and they have been proven by research to reduce vehicle miles traveled. I don't know if the point values exactly reflect what San Francisco implemented, but they are similar. So I am strongly begging you to pass this, because I've been working on this and laboring with, watching Plan Commission struggle with it, and watching applicants at Plan Commission struggle with trying to meet transportation demand management requirements for a very long time. And this is an opportunity to give them some certainty, to explain what it is the city would like. We want them to reduce vehicle miles traveled, not just car trips, but the actual, driving for both residents and employees and people going to businesses and things like that. We often focus on the work trip, but TDM is not just about the work trip, because the work trip is only 20% of trips. It is usually the greatest mileage that people drive, but it is only 20% of the actual trips that they make. But it also sets the tone for other trips that they're going to make. And we've looked a lot at employers, but I want to also focus on residents. Right now, there's a lot of buildings that give free parking to people who rent apartments. But people who don't use those spots, people who don't own cars or only own one car, or, want to get rid of their car, they're paying for that parking, whether they use it or not. And this contributes to an affordable housing issue. Why should somebody who is not using a spot that is worth $150 a month in my neighborhood, why should they pay for $150 a month for something in their building that they're not using? They could be paying $150 a month less in rent by not using that parking spot and instead walking, biking, or taking the bus to work, or to school, or to daycare, or to the library, or wherever else they're going to go. So the same thing applies to employees. It's a compensation issue. If you're giving free parking to employees, people who are not using that free parking are basically getting ripped off for the monthly cost of that parking. Mm-hmm. They could be using that for something else. They could be getting cash. They could use it for transit. They could get a cargo bike. They could take a taxi once in a while. They could, put it into their kids' college fund, whatever it is they want to do. They're not paying for that parking. So it is a benefit to the city. It is a benefit to the employees. It is a benefit to the residents. We are making compensation at employment centers more fair, and we are making housing more affordable by unbundling parking or asking the employer to just charge for parking separately or give a person a chance to opt out of the parking. So I actually have a lot more to say about this, but the only other thing I'm going to say is that we often hear that people who don't live in Madison can't use a lot of these programs. They have to drive because they don't have transit or whatever for where they live. But I know from working at the university and from working downtown that there's an awful lot of people that they drive partway into the city and then they get on the bus because they don't want to pay for parking downtown. They have learned that they can get a bus pass from the university as an employee for, I don't know how much it is now, $60 for the whole year. And they can just park on the outskirts of town, jump on the bus, and not have to pay for parking, which is $1,000 a year for the cheapest parking spot on campus. So a lot of people are making this work already. And I am confident that employees and residents and people going to businesses will figure out a way to make this work as well. And we're not telling them they can't drive. They can drive. We're just saying that if you don't drive, you don't have to pay for parking, or you get some of these other benefits. There are a lot of other things that could be added that the city could add that other cities are doing. But let's see how the program works. And we can always add in those things later. They're small point value things, but if we want to add them in, we can add them in.
Great. Thank you, Robbie. Other comments or discussion? I would just like to say that I also am very supportive of the program. I think the increased level of predictability is very, very important in the development process. I was a commercial banker, a commercial real estate lender and credit officer for 40 some years. And, understanding that is really important in the development process. And I think that this program really aligns well with so many of the other transportation initiatives that we're seeing move through into the implementation process now. So I think it's really, really exciting. And I've spent a lot of time reviewing all the material, and I'd just like to compliment everybody. I used to write policies, guidelines, and procedures for a living, and that user manual is really, really well done, and something that I think will be very easy for people to use and understand the program. Denise, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. I just want to echo the excitement about this. I've heard about this program in other cities, and as someone who's a non-driver, a lot of the benefit that is there for drivers is in now leveling the playing field. It's a key equity issue. So I'm very excited to support this.
Thanks, Denise. Alder Evers, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've been listening in on this, and I do want to encourage you all to vote for this. I would suggest that the objections that some may have to this are rooted in a status quo circumstance of a car-centric culture and all the habits that attend to that. Over time, that's going to change. And it's our responsibility as policymakers to be forward-thinking, to anticipate the type of city that we need to have and the incentives we need to develop to get there, rather than being held back by those who are complaining that this is not convenient for the way we do things now. We have to be moving forward and looking to the future. So I encourage you to embrace this forward thinking, forward focused approach.
Thank you, Alder. Other comments or questions? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I will assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody would like a roll call vote. If anybody wishes to vote no or abstain or have a roll call vote, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, it passes unanimously. So well done. A lot of great work. So thank you, Philip, very much. Okay, next we have members of TPPB, and our members aren't here tonight, but I attended the TPPB meeting on November 14th, and they talked about complete green streets. And that's going to be introduced at the Common Council meeting on the 6th and come to TC on the 14th, as well as the Board of Public Works on December 14th, then Transportation Policy and Planning Board on December 19th, and the Common Council for adoption in January. So I know we've all been following that very closely, so that's moving forward. And then there was an introduction on passenger rail that was done at the policy board meeting, which was very interesting. So if you didn't have an opportunity to watch the meeting, please go ahead and do so. Tom, did you have any other comments?
Well, since you're talking about passenger rail, we do have a public meeting on December 7th.
Okay.
So that's an advertisement, right?
Okay, great.
But I'm couching it as a comment that
Sure.
We believe that we will actually have some staff people from Amtrak there.
Okay.
And so that's they will be key partners if we get passenger rail. So we encourage everyone, if you can make it. We're going to have an in-person session. I think the in-person starts at 5:00, and then we'll have a virtual meeting, I think, at 6:30. It's on the website. We have a website.
Okay, well, if Aiden can get the link to that, why don't we have Aiden send that out to TC members, and everybody will have the dates and times and all of that information. Thank you, Tom. Any other comments about Transportation Policy and Planning Board? Okay. I don't have any announcements this time around. In terms of agenda items, we're going to have we only have one meeting in December, and it will be a fairly busy meeting, as you can see from the potential agenda items that are saved in Legistar. We got Safe Streets Madison, traffic signal priority, annual crash report, winter bike maintenance, complete green streets. And several public works projects that will be coming. So it should be a fairly busy meeting. Does anybody have any other future agenda items that aren't on the list already or in our work plan that you would like to see added to the list? Okay. All right.
And I just have a question that I don't know who to address it to. Maybe to Tao, if he's is with the green cab going out of business. Is that anything that
we're going to have that as an agenda? We'll have that as a future agenda item. I sent an email to Yang and to Keith and asked them about that. And that's certainly something that TC has looked at in the past. It's also something, Tom, that Transportation Policy and Planning Board has looked at. So I think TC
I'm not sure if it's ours or if it's planning.
Right. Board. Yeah. So I was thinking a brief update to TC, because we hear from the cab drivers and the cab owners all the time about need for that and potential ordinance changes. But again, ordinance changes are the purview of the policy board. So
thanks.
Yeah, I did think it was appropriate to have an update here. Tom, did you have any other thoughts about here or Transportation Policy and Planning Board?
No, but that's a good item. It is concerning, right? We taxis provide a valuable service to us, and so and they have competition now that they didn't have 20 years ago, right? So
exactly. Yeah. Well, we'll put it on as a future agenda item, and Keith had said they'd be happy to come and give us an update. So we'll plan to have that on the agenda. Thanks, Bill. Other future agenda items? Okay. Next, we have item 10, which is the development agreement with Mortensen Development for the reconstruction of the Lake Street portion of the State Street campus garage. We had this noticed as potentially needing to go into closed session. My understanding that we don't need to go into closed session. So Kevin and Steve, I assume you're still both comfortable with us proceeding in open session?
Yes, I don't see any issue. If things start to go in the wrong direction, or I feel the need that we should be going into closed session, I'll let you guys know.
Okay. All right. Great.
I defer to Kevin, but I agree basically.
Okay. Awesome. And Tom, we
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, great. Tom, I believe we have Nate Gundrum. So I believe we have some registrants on this item, correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay, so we'll hear from staff with the presentation. And Tom, I know that you were interested in having Nate available to answer questions potentially, and he is in the attendees, and we can have him promoted to a panelist at the appropriate time. Would that be all right?
And I think Matt Meklajewski is also on, and and so maybe.
So we would have a presentation from staff first, then we would hear from registrants, and then we would have discussion, would be my plan.
Yeah. So I think maybe the most logical way to go through this would be for me to maybe introduce the project, kind of what we're doing. Then Matt Meklajewski goes through the details of the agreement. And so maybe that might be best to do at the end, once you see what the project is. He does that much better than I will do that. And then I think Nate would just be available for questions. So typically Nate is the lead presenter, but this time he maybe gets to take a back seat. So
okay, he can help field the questions later on after we have the registrants. So if you want to start, then we can bring Matt in to follow with the staff presentation. Then we'll hear from the registrants and then go to questions and discussion.
Okay, I'm going to share, and then this might work best if I'm going to try to run the slideshow. Sometimes that works when you're in Zoom, and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so I'll move forward. This is a picture, an aerial picture showing the components of the project. You can see the housing massing, the parking, where the intercity bus terminal exit is, and where the general parking entrance and exit is. So I just changed my slide. Did that change also in Zoom?
It did, yes.
Okay, so we're good. Really, the goal is to replace a 60-year-old facility. Our garages don't have an endless life. You can see some of the distress associated with it. And then a second goal is to create a permanent intercity bus terminal. The intercity buses have kind of been bounced around over the last 10 to 15 years. For the majority of that time, they stage on Langdon. For a little bit of that time, they stage in front of the Art Center on University. Now they're on Lake Street near Gordon Commons. But they provide actually a super critical service. One, they provide intercity transportation for students. But if you don't own a car, or, and you want to see family members somewhere, they provide a really necessary service for people that want to just visit their family in Milwaukee or something. It both helps students, but it helps just normal people too. And the RFP was issued by Economic Development last year. Went through a ranking process. Mortenson Development was selected in March of 2022. Factors that were involved in that selection included the air rights payment, which is key, the amount of TIF value generated, TIF increment generated, the amount of affordable housing for students, parking, garage geometrics, and consistency with city goals like Lake Street activation. The current proposal right now is that we have all of all the public parking would enter and exit off of Lake Street. And then the private parking, which is generally associated with the apartments, 80 stalls, would enter off of Hawthorne Court. That way they're separated. We don't have too many entrances on Lake Street. Our current proposal reduces the public parking by about 88 stalls. About 2/3 of this is paid with air rights and TIF. And then 1/3 is paid with a parking reserve. So that the air rights payment, which will be about 18 million, will replenish the parking fund reserve. Something that's new about this is that the parking fund will service the debt. So there will be about $14 million worth of debt that the parking fund will service. And so that means that the parking fund will use their funds to pay, on average $1 million a year. And so that's something that hasn't been true with other developments. The nice thing about this, though, is that we have a 60-year-old structure that we do not have enough money to replace right now in the parking fund. And so this provides a way for 2/3 of it to be paid using other means. This is the current intercity bus circulation. We are proposing on making Hawthorne Court one-way northbound. It will have 3 stalls kind of under the roof and 2 overflow stalls for like when there are Thanksgiving and Christmas and end of term needs for that. It was possible for us to put it into a 4-stall configuration with back in, back out. Speaking with the intercity bus terminal provider, or intercity bus providers like Coach USA and Badger Bus, they really didn't like that. They prefer just a more pull in, pull through situation. So we reduced the number of stalls by 1 so that they could have their preferred method of boarding. So this is Hawthorne Court. You can see how narrow it is. And if you can believe it, this is about 16 feet wide or less, and it handles 2-way traffic. And so with this proposal, we will be making Hawthorne Court northbound only. Here you can see the challenges that exist with 2-way traffic on Hawthorne Court. We feel like the northbound traffic flow is probably advantageous, whether or not we had a bus terminal here. This is what the Hawthorne Court looks like for as you're entering it from University. Hawthorne Court has been kind of a subject of discussion, you might say, in the approval of this. Should we be using Hawthorne Court? It's not great right now. You can see there's no real room for pedestrian queuing, for pedestrian use. The current regulations, because it's a fire lane, do not allow stopping, standing, or parking there. But parkers routinely stop there and block the lane, either to load into these doors or to help service some of the restaurants to the east. So we have a situation in its current state that's just not really the best. We do have private parking on Hawthorne. You can see where the private parking exists. Some is close to the university, and some is closer to State Street and the red boxes. How we are planning on handling the parking circulation, just of cars, not buses, is that the 80 stalls associated with the apartments, those are going to be familiar users, right? So we will have familiar users that are in the apartments enter their parking from University and use Hawthorne Court, and then they will actually go down below and they'll have the underground parking. To get out, they will just take a left and go through the bus terminal. The bus terminal will actually function almost like an alley. So there will be buses berthed there, right? But then there will be traffic that flows past those buses. It'll be infrequent traffic. And it's really not that much different than really what is occurring right now on Lake Street right now, right? The buses are berthed on Lake Street and then traffic flows beside the buses. The north parking lot and the south parking lot would have to follow the same patterns. I think it's roughly 16 to 20 stalls. However, those will be with repeat uses. The nice thing about this is that all the entering and exiting of the complicated parking, that's underground, uses Hawthorne Court, is all for repeat users that are going to be using it for a year. The public parking is very accessible and very visible, and it's on Lake Street. So if you think about someone that might be visiting from Waukesha or Conomowoc, going to a Badger basketball game, right? We don't want to be routing them down Hawthorne Court to get to underground parking that they're never going to understand how to get out of. Instead, all of our non-frequent event type parking, which this parking garage serves a lot of, is all directed, very visible, very easy circulation. And there you can see. Eventually, the Francis side of this parking garage is about 20 years newer than the Lake Street side. So, we hope to get that 20 years of use. But eventually, when that's reconstructed, we would probably like that aisle to go east-west all the way from Francis Street over to Lake Street. We do have loading issues. And we have loading issues, not just on Hawthorne Court, but also on University. There you can see I think that's an Uber Eats car in front of that Station Inca. There's other eating establishments here. If you stand, by this tree for 10 minutes, you will see many, many cars doing that. So that presents a problem. One, because that lane is going to become a dedicated BRT bus lane, right? And a dedicated bus lane only works if there's no cars in it, right? No parked cars. And so we probably need to look at the loading issue from a broader perspective and solve maybe a couple problems at once. We think probably the best way to do that might be to create some short-term parking bays, loading zones. One could be at the existing bus stop that will be abandoned near Francis Street. One could be near the W bar. What this does is it addresses the short-term parking need that we have in front of these restaurants, but also some of the loading problems or needs that are currently using Hawthorne Court, blocking Hawthorne Court, blocking a fire lane. We just don't want that. There is pedestrian queuing on Hawthorne Court on weekend nights, and there's been a considerable amount of discussion on the safety of this. This picture, pretty much shows what happens. Most of the students, they try and get on that little 2-foot sidewalk. Some are not able to fit on it, right? We believe that by making it one way, we can improve the situation. Instead of a 2-foot walkway there, we'll be able to provide a 7-foot walkway because we're making this one way. We're hoping that the motor vehicle portion of it will also be kind of designed in a winter type of way, in that pedestrians will feel comfortable walking in the street, and that motor vehicles, meaning cars and buses, will feel like they're visitors in that space and treat it in that manner. There have been discussion and requests. Why can't all the buses and all the traffic be devoted to Lake Street and just leave Hawthorne Court the way it is? What ends up happening is that we had 4 finalists in the development proposals. 3 out of the 4 finalists used Hawthorne Court in some way. They felt like it was the most efficient and effective way to meet the city's objectives. There was one, though, that did not use Hawthorne Court. And so we're showing that on the left. The problem with that is it has 4 openings, which is somewhat confusing. If you're a visitor, which opening do you pick? You have 4 to choose from, right? There's 10 turning movements, and about 40% of the frontage is driveway. What we're proposing right here has 2 openings, 5 turning movements, and about 25% of the frontage is driveway. And so one of the goals was to activate a portion of Lake Street. So here's a kind of a front view of the development. You can see it's somewhat more clear. General parking is to the right in the red box, and then just the bus exit is to the left. So imagine this building with 2 more entrances and exits. You could see how the frontage of this could get quite confusing. This does involve a parking stall reduction of about 88 stalls. Basically, what happens is that instead of having 2 underground levels or 1.5 underground levels, we're just going to have 1 underground level. We did a study to see how often those 88 stalls are used. The current maximum is roughly around 1050. The proposed maximum would be right around I'm going to say 970, right? And those are our maximum occupancies for about almost 3 years. And so we would miss those stalls sometimes, but not frequently. Mostly they are associated with UW events. I think we've already gone through this, so I'm going to. These 88 stalls would cost $7.9 million if we decided that we wanted to keep them. Those 88 stalls would generate roughly $10,000 to $15,000 per year. So that's quite low for that type of investment. How much would it cost to operate the 88 stalls? We'd have about $500,000 in debt service, bond payments, assuming 3.5%, 20 year. That's an average, right? Because bond payments escalate up and down. And then about $180,000 of operating costs. And so that's why we are recommending that you go with just a slightly smaller garage. What would it take to keep the 88 stalls? We'd have to pay the extra $7 to $8 million in construction costs. Those stalls would probably have to be accessed through Hawthorne Court. So we would be adding more traffic to Hawthorne Court. We probably wouldn't want to route unfamiliar users there. And in some ways, what it ends up doing is that we're paying a high price to build parking so that people can go to a Badger basketball game. And I like Badger basketball games, and I'm very sorry that they lost to Wake Forest last night, right? But is that our mission, to subsidize, event parking for the UW? And I don't know if that's really our mission. Our mission is really to support some of the businesses and other things in the downtown. One thing that's true about this parking garage is that we have about 358 24/7 monthly parkers, right? And that generally are students. Those are generally students that are using our garages to park their car. And, students have a lot of other options. The UW TDM program is one of the best in the nation. So those are some of the key things. I think I've talked about it. I'm going to provide a little summary, and then I think Matt Milkowiczewski probably would be good for him to come on after I read these bullets. This proposal provides an opportunity to replace the Lake Street ramp that would not be financially possible otherwise. The proposal provides an opportunity to construct an intercity bus terminal. The cost associated with adding another underground level to recoup those 88 spaces is significantly greater than the revenue generated. The use of Hawthorne Court has challenges. It's not the perfect solution, but we feel like it's a better solution than some of the alternate layouts that do not use Hawthorne Court. And we will make efforts to mitigate some of these adverse effects. Right? the development agreement, which Matt Mekla-Jesse has conditions for both parties, and the conditions include significant incentives and costs to motivate both the city and the developer. So it's what Matt Mekla-Jesse is going to talk about is very important. Yet, even with those incentives and costs, the staff are recommending approval. So on that, I think I'm going to let Matt Mekla-Jesse kind of explain or overview of the development agreement.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Matt, go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Matt Mekla-Jesse. I'm the Economic Development Director for the city. And thank you for inviting me here this evening to review the development agreement with you. And I just need to move one thing on my screen here, just one moment. All right, I think this is better. Sorry about that. Having a little technical difficulty here. As Tom indicated, the item before you this evening is the development agreement with Mortenson Development for the redevelopment of the Lake Street side of the State Street campus garage. And before I get started, I just want to note that there is a typo in this first paragraph. It refers to about 500 public parking spaces. That should be about 500 total parking spaces. So I apologize for that error. And Tom provided you with some more detailed information that has a breakdown of those parking spaces. The development agreement that is before you this evening is the document that's really going to structure the relationship between the City of Madison, the parking utility, and Mortenson Development in the years ahead. And the development agreement really splits the work between items that happen before the real estate closing with Mortenson Development that'll likely occur in January of 2024, and then those items that occur after the real estate closing in January 2024. So that's really a key date for you to keep in mind as we walk through this development agreement with you, is that there are things that happen before we close on the transaction and then things that happen after we close on the transaction. In terms of what will occur prior to closing, so what will occur effectively throughout 2023 is both parties, the city and Mortenson Development, will complete all of the design work for their respective elements of the project. And by way of reminder, the city elements of the project are all of the parking, the intercity bus terminal, and then the exterior structure of the apartment units that will surround the parking structure. Mortenson Development will be responsible for finishing the apartment units, but we will complete, and Mortenson will pay us to complete sort of the main structure and the exterior of those apartment units adjacent to the parking structure. Mortenson Development is in turn entirely responsible for construction of the apartment tower above. So throughout this evening, when I refer to the public component, it's really the parking in the intercity bus terminal, and the private component is the apartment tower. So each party will complete the design for their respective element of the project and also secure all the land use approvals and building permits needed to move forward. We will also negotiate with Mortenson Development the condominium documents that will govern our long-term relationship. So once construction is completed, this entire development will likely have 2 condominium units. One will be the parking that will continue to be owned by the parking utility. And then the second condo unit will be that apartment tower above, and also those apartment units that line the parking structure. So we will work with Mortenson Development to negotiate those condo agreements again over 2023. We will need to negotiate the purchase and sale agreement and the ground lease. What will happen at closing is we will sell the property to Mortenson Development, and then we will immediately release it back from Mortenson Development in order to complete the city construction. And then at the end of the transaction, we will have ownership of our condo unit. We will bid the project in 2023, and therefore we will know how much the project will cost the parking utility before we close on the real estate transaction. And this is a really important safety valve for the city. We know that construction costs are rising significantly throughout the country, and this provides a level of protection to the city that we can know for sure what it's going to cost us at the point in time that we sell the property to Mortenson Development. We will execute and record a land use restriction regarding the affordable housing that I'll describe a little further below. Mortenson Development will need to provide evidence to us that they have secured financing to construct the private apartment tower. We will execute a construction management and escrow agreement, both of which I'll describe a little later. Now, all of those activities will occur throughout 2023. There are two items, though, that we have agreed to find resolution to by the end of January 31st of 2023. And the first is to better define a release milestone for the project. And what the release milestone is will be the point in time when the city has completed enough of the structural construction of the parking component such that Mortenson Development is able to start construction of the apartment tower. As I think everyone is aware, these apartments are going to be targeted towards students, and therefore Mortenson Development needs to ensure that they can have those apartments ready for occupancy by the fall semester of 2026. And so as we count backwards, Mortenson Development needs to know for sure that there's going to be a point in time where they can begin constructing that apartment structure. And that's referred to as the release milestone. And we still need to work with Mortenson on better defining exactly what that will look like. And we will do that by the end of January of next year. Secondly, we will be hiring Mortenson Construction to serve as the construction manager for both the public project and the private project. And this will help ensure a smooth transition as we move from the public component to the private component. And we've started negotiating this agreement, but by the end of January, we need to come to terms on a fee for that service. So again, these are all items that will be completed prior to the real estate closing. And I should mention that prior to the real estate closing, so prior to January 2024, there is some ability for either the city or Mortenson Development to walk away from the deal. So for example, if we realize that it's going to cost us significantly more to construct either component, the public or in Mortenson's case, the private component, there is some ability to walk away from the transaction. Once we close, though, in January of 2024, we really, as a city and as a parking utility, will need to be committed to moving forward with construction in a very expeditious manner in order to meet our need to have a reconstructed parking structure and also Mortenson's development to have those apartment units open. So what will happen on January of 2024 is Mortenson Development will pay the parking utility $18 million into escrow for the property, and we will then immediately lease it back from Mortenson for $1 so that we can move forward with our construction. Our construction will include demolishing the existing Lake Street side of the State Street campus garage and completing any necessary remediation, although we don't foresee that there will be significant remediation. So in other words, what will likely happen is that the Lake Street side of the State Street campus garage would likely be demolished in the first quarter of 2024 per this agreement. And then on or before January 1st of 2025, we need to meet that release milestone and be able to turn over the property to Mortenson Development to begin construction of the apartment. This doesn't mean that the parking needs to be finished. It just means that the structural work needs to be completed such that Mortenson can begin the structural elements of the apartment tower above. Certain construction costs at this point will be reimbursed by Mortenson. That refers to those liner apartment units that'll be adjacent to the parking structure. Mortenson Development then will proceed with construction of their private apartments above. The city and the parking utility will be required to secure a certificate of occupancy for the parking structure by May 1st of 2026, or that deadline could be extended if Mortenson is delayed in their certificate of occupancy for the apartments. Once the project construction is completed, Mortenson Development will sell the city its condo for $1, and then we will continue to operate that property under the condo arrangement that we agreed to. Also, during the closing months of construction, the city will reconstruct at its cost Hawthorne Court to be a one-way northbound street with a much wider pedestrian zone, as Tom described in his presentation. So that's kind of the rundown of sort of the order of operations for our work with Mortenson in the years ahead. I just want to touch on a couple of other items that may be of interest to the Commission. As I noted before, at closing, Mortenson Development would pay the parking utility $18 million. That would be paid, though, in an escrow agreement with a schedule of when those funds would be released to the parking utility. And the reason for that is Mortenson Development wants to ensure that the project moves forward in an expeditious manner. And by holding back some of the funding, they can do that. So as noted here, the $18 million would be dispersed, $500,000 after utility work, $4 million after foundation work, $7.5 million after that release milestone. And then the remaining balance of $6 million will be held until the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. If we meet that release milestone by January 1st of 2025, we'd receive the entire $6 million. If we are delayed in that release milestone, then Mortenson Development would be eligible for some damages off of that $6 million. I mentioned before the affordable housing component. The resolution that's before you this evening calls for what is referred to as Option A in Exhibit F of the document. Option A would maintain the full $18 million air right payment, and Option A would provide 100 affordable beds, 68% discounted at 10% and 32 discounted at 25%. The city would record a land use restriction agreement on the property that would ensure that those affordable units are maintained for at least 30 years. And we would also require Mortenson Development to execute a memorandum of understanding with UW-Madison's Office of Financial Aid, because it is that office that would direct students to these affordable units if those students are eligible for affordable housing subsidy. This project has a lot of benefits to the city. As Tom mentioned, we replace an aging parking structure, and we have the majority of the cost paid for by the air rights and the tax increment financing. Also, this will have a great impact on the urban fabric of downtown, providing an intercity bus terminal and certainly enlivening the Lake Street compared to what is there today, as well as Hawthorne Court. That being said, though, there are some risks that we do need to be aware of as a city and as a parking utility as we move forward with this project. First, as I mentioned before, prior to closing, both the city and Mortenson Development have some ability to walk away from the transaction. However, during 2023, both parties will be spending significant money on all of the design work and the construction documents that need to be prepared. So there is some risk that if either the city or Mortenson Development realize the project is not financially viable, that we will have already spent funds on design work that may or not be useful in a future development scenario. Once the project closes in 2024, again, we would need to proceed expeditiously on completing the construction of the new parking structure. Otherwise, Mortenson Development would be sub-eligible to receive some of the penalties outlined in the escrow agreement. If the city fails significantly, though, in the construction of the parking ramp, Mortenson Development would also have some option to take over ownership of the structure and complete the construction themselves. That is, though, at the far end of the risk profile, and there is opportunity for the city to remedy situations if we are delayed. But if the worst were to happen, Mortenson does have the ability to take over construction ownership of the facility. Assuming, however, that the public component moves forward on budget and on time and we meet the release milestone as we plan, admittedly, there is some risk to us relative to Mortenson's development's ability to complete the apartment tower. The floor of the apartment tower is basically the ceiling of the parking structure. And it's sort of a seamless transition between the two. So if Mortenson development were, for whatever reason, not able to move forward or didn't move forward, the city would have to take back then that project and complete the parking structure and possibly complete the apartment tower. That could have added costs for the city, and it could delay opening the parking structure. The parking structure, as noted before, would likely be demolished in early 2024. That means that likely we would be without the Lake Street side of the State Street Campus Garage for about 2.5 years. So any additional delay would be a delay in the ability to attract revenue from this facility. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions now or after the public speakers, and look forward to having the conversation with you. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think at this point now we'll hear from any registrants who are registered to speak. Who do we have, Aiden?
Sure. So the first registrant was Nate Gundrum. He's from Mortenson. I don't know if we should check in with him or just move on.
Did you have comments that you want to make, Nate, or we'll invite you in as a panelist when we get to the questions and answers. Up to you. If you'd like, you have 3 minutes if you want to make some general comments now.
Sure, that's perfectly fine. And nothing to add to Tom and Matt's presentation. Happy to answer any questions when we get to that point.
Okay, great. We'll defer and invite you in as a panelist when we get to that point. Thanks, Nate. Who else do we have?
So next is Eli Sorovsky of Wilson Street, Madison. Neither supports nor opposes and wishes to speak.
There's no one by that name in the attendees list.
All right.
Okay.
So next is Cleo Lee of Spring Street, Madison, Wisconsin. Neither supports nor opposes and wishes to speak, and is also representing the Campus Area Neighborhood Association.
Okay. Cleo, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, yes. Hello. Hi, everyone. Tom and Matt gave a pretty comprehensive overview of the project and the nuances of it, which I really appreciate. I am here as a representative of the Campus Area Neighborhood Association, or CANA for short. For those who don't know, CANA is responsible for heading a steering committee process for neighborhood input for proposed development projects within our zone, which is the campus area and part of State Street. This usually involves gathering local stakeholders together and working with the development team to ensure that the proposal meets the needs of the community that it will be built in. We discuss topics such as safety, affordability, sustainability, just all the things that affect the quality of life for those in the area and future residents of the building itself. So even though we as a steering committee have not been able to gain an audience with the development team, we as community stakeholders have continued to meet and disseminate information and updates about the proposal with each other to see if it is truly meeting the needs of the community in that area. So I do want to preface this with the fact that we do support an inner city bus terminal and are actually really excited about a permanent shelter for it. However, we do continue to have major concerns with the transportation plan I want to make sure to reiterate, which Tom has also presented pretty well earlier. But before I run out of time, I do want to make sure to mention that our concerns are documented in the CANA Steering Committee report from November 21st, and it can be found on the Legislar. And I also recognize that the Department of Transportation has released a memo on the 27th that attempts to address the issues mentioned. However, we feel that they still do not address the safety concerns, specifically the safety of pedestrians around Hawthorne Court. And there also has not been concrete solutions for the issues of delivery parking for the restaurants of that block and the emergency exit for Liquid. So we really urge the Transportation Committee to consider the safety issues inherent in this current plan and push for a more comprehensive evaluation of that transportation plan. Please also make sure that those who will be directly impacted by the use of Hawthorne Court for this project, including the restaurants and nightclubs on that block, along with the apartment complexes at the end of Hawthorne Court, are included and valued in this discussion, and just really consider how to integrate their concerns into an improved plan, because will really heavily affect their services and the quality of life in that area. Their input as community members are vital, but this has not been demonstrated in this development process. So this is not a redevelopment that should be rushed, because the first building lasted 60 years. So this can be maybe like more than that. So we really want to ensure that this isn't a process that is rushed to ensure the best usage possible. So again, you can find more information in the steering committee report, which is attached in the Legislar. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have a question for the registrant or questions? Okay, seeing none. Did we have any other registrants?
There is one more. I don't see them in the attendee list though, but it's John Chapman of West Johnson Madison supports and wishes to speak.
Correct. They're not in the attendees list here.
Okay, we may have lost them over the course of the longer meeting. Okay, so that's everybody, Aiden?
And then some people that are not wishing to speak.
Oh, sure. Go ahead and read them off, please.
So Mike Oates of East Chicago Street, Milwaukee, supports and does not wish to speak. Claire Lahman and then I believe all the next are representing Mortensen. So you got Claire Lahman, Tom Atchison, Brent Webb, Dan Lesser, Jill Drickle, and Ryan Hatton, all registered in support and not wishing to speak.
Okay, is that all that we have then?
Yep, that's everybody.
Okay, when we go to questions and discussions, Stefan, could we move Nate from an attendee to a panelist so that we can see him and he can be available to answer questions?
Yep. Looks like he is transferring over right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so comments or questions? Bridget, go for it.
Thanks, Anne. Bridget Brown here. So I just had a couple of questions about the damages provisions, especially in the current environment that we're all operating in with supply chains and other supply chain issues and other issues that can come up that can severely delay, construction projects these days, through no fault of the city. And I want to make sure that, those provisions in the contract, allow for some, the possibility that, there will be delays through no fault of the cities, and that the city and the taxpayers aren't punished for that. So I'm wondering if someone could speak on that. And then related to that also, making sure that the phase terminology, so the utilities, the foundation work, et cetera, that those are really well defined so that both parties are on the same page as to exactly what constitutes completion of those phases. So if somebody could just talk about those, I would appreciate it.
Okay, Kevin or Matt, or who wants to talk about the penalty part of it?
I think that would be me.
Okay.
So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Kevin Ramakrishnan. I'm an assistant city attorney. On the damages, there's a couple of things. The first is our contracts are going to have a force majeure provision. So if there are if there are delays beyond our control, that will sort of be built in. But what we're looking at here is, what is the impact to Mortenson based on, when we achieve a release milestone and when we achieve our certificate of occupancy. The idea has been throughout the negotiations to move this at a pace that we can feel confident that we can hit these deadlines. If there are serious delays, first and foremost, as Matt mentioned before, we're going to have the ability to go out to bid. We're going to know what the costs are. We're going to have these end dates built into the contract for the public works. So our contractor is going to know what the impact is going to be. If they cannot make it, there's going to be damages against them as well. So hopefully the city is not on its own. If there are delays, the contractor could be responsible as well. So that's sort of one piece of it. And then the other piece is, as I said, the long runway that we're trying to give ourselves to make sure that we don't have any issue making it to those deadlines.
Okay, thanks, Kevin, on that piece of it. Does anybody else have any other comments with regard to that? Because that's always, today's environment, that's of great concern.
And I know there was a second part that I'm not thinking of right now. There's a second part.
Sure, Bridget, you want to reiterate the second part, please? Bridget?
Yeah, just making sure that those phase requirements, so the terminology for each of the phases. I know in the memo, it was, I think it was one or two word phrases, foundation, utility, etc., that those terms are very well defined, so that both parties are very clear on what constitutes completion of each of those phases.
Absolutely. That has been an ongoing conversation already with our engineering department. It's going to be a really the key to keeping this project moving forward and making it feasible is that the scopes of work are very well defined and that we know that we can hit that release milestone on time. That is a very serious, it's a good question, and it is probably the most serious thing that's going to be coming for this project.
Great, thank you. Anne, is it okay? I have one last question.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So my last question, this is, I'm sure, all me. Can someone explain a little bit better? I'm not entirely understanding the condo element here. Could someone just maybe put it into the simplest terms possible for me?
So a condominium, people think about these as like, oh, I bought a condo. What it actually is it legally and under the statutes, it's a condominium form of ownership. So what that allows you to do is split ownerships for different spaces inside one building. So it's a complicated sort of legal instrument, but it's all set out in statute how you divide these ownerships. So we can take a portion of the parking ramp, right? Or we can take the parking ramp and say, this is owned, this box, as however we define it, is owned by the city. And then all of these other elements are owned by Mortenson. So it's a way of sort of vertically subdividing.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. So then my concern, I guess, that I'd like to express there is just that to make sure that as that's divided up, because I'm assuming that, it'll be laid out in the condo docs exactly what decisions would need to be made, through, I guess it would have to still be some sort of an association of the owners, so that the city's portion, the city's ownership is, certainly at least comparable to Mortenson's in terms of, percentage of ownership, so that the city can't just, easily be outvoted on issues.
So you're talking about decision making, Bridget?
Yeah. Yep.
This is a fantastic question. This is we went through this recently with the Block 88 development with Stonehouse. We've been through it and learned from a lot of mistakes on previous deals. But I think we have a pretty good idea of how to handle it with the Stonehouse Block 88 development. And really, it's about creating as much. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but we know how to create a larger definition of the term unit, fewer common elements, fewer shared spaces. And then you're absolutely right. One of the things that we'll probably end up having to discuss is putting an additional board member on the association, some third party neutral, so that we are not getting outvoted 2-1 on everything. So yeah, we've been down that road before, so we will have our eyes open for that.
Great. And then if certain parts do get sold off to third parties, that sort of remaining percentage voting rights, still is balanced among the two original parties.
Yeah, I'll
Okay,
say
great.
yes, I agree.
Okay.
This is very into the weeds. These are great questions and great comments. It's fantastic.
Well, it's always of concern when you have condo ownership in terms of who makes decisions and how. I mean, Nate, right? Who makes the decisions and how does that work? So excellent questions, Bridget and Kevin. It sounds like you're on top of all of those in terms of making sure the definitions are clear and that the city is protected as well as it can be. Did you have other questions? Those are great questions, Bridget. Other questions?
Nope, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, great. Harold, your turn.
Yeah, thanks. Great questions indeed. Totally not my area of expertise, so I will focus on things that I know more about, like the transportation-related things that have come up. So a couple questions. For the bus terminal, so I see this little waiting area. Tom, can you say a little bit more of what that's going to look like? Like, I assume there's going to be seating. I think there was mention of restroom. This is going to be operated by the city. Are there going to be any other amenities for that?
Yeah, here I have a concept drawing right now. We don't yet have access to our designer through a contract, so we've got some preliminary thoughts. This is currently what it looks like. As far as a concept, we have a 12-foot lane for a bus, and in reality, that bus probably will it'll be parked and be using 10 feet of it. They felt pretty strongly that they needed 10 feet because for loading, I guess, they load underneath into their compartments, their luggage compartments. And then also they needed that for disabled access. And so we have 10 feet of loading, and then we have an interior space right here. It could be a bathroom here and a bathroom here. We might be able to maybe, shift these walls a little bit. The stairway, I think, is somewhat fixed. The elevator shaft is somewhat fixed. So this is kind of what it's looking like right now. It'd be nicer to have a little bit larger interior space. But when you speak with the providers, we could perhaps modify it a little bit, but they do They have certain things like they did not want to back in and out. That was just something they said they won't use it if we have them back in and out. They felt like they needed that 10 feet. And so we'll try and maximize what we can with what we have. It will be an interior space. We would like to have bathrooms. We have to, we'll have to figure out what the operations look like on that. We've discussed some intercity, who would operate this with some intercity bus terminal providers or intercity providers, such as Greyhound currently runs the one in Milwaukee. But right now that's just kind of a schematic type thing. This wouldn't open until 2026. And a lot of those carriers, in all honesty, are kind of recovering from the COVID crisis where their ridership dropped to very low. And there are models for us to charge providers. We do charge providers for Dutch Mill, and so we'll move into that more as this project goes on.
Okay. Yeah, I think it did indeed. I mean, partly it looked kind of small on the other drawing that you showed. And so I understand the tension that if we don't accommodate the bus services wishes, then they may not use it. And that's obviously very counterproductive. But yeah, maybe as this goes along, trying to maximize the indoor space, maybe thinking about having some outdoor seating in addition to that. And I think bathrooms are really absolutely essential. I mean, that's one of the big issues with the current situation, that there is no consistent bathroom access.
So that's something you could you could mention, outdoor seating, because right now the other committees that are looking at this, such as UDC and others, are focusing more on the outdoor street architecture, you might say, streetscape.
Yeah, and what I mean by outdoor in this case is like in what is now labeled in here as loading area, like, have a row of seats, which doesn't really, I think, shouldn't affect the width of the loading area. Okay. Because, I think you can't fit more than maybe 25 people into that room, and that's not a lot.
Yep.
Then that question of Hawthorne Court, I think your arguments make sense that having everything come in from Lake Street is not a good solution for a variety of reasons. I don't really have safety concerns too much about Hawthorne Court. I mean, in short, it's going to be low speed. I think we should, building it as a nerve. I think we'll have to talk about what exactly that means. I think one of the drawings you showed had an angled curb, and maybe that's actually not a good use case if you have giant buses driving there, or if you want to discourage loading zone parking and then make it easy to pull onto the sidewalk. So I think the design details we can figure out for that. But I think the general concept of using Hawthorne Court for the bus access is good. With the private parking access, it's 88 spots. Do you have a sense of how many trips per day, what that translates to in AADT?
No, I guess the operator of the facility actually has a very low trip generation thought. I think he was thinking a couple times a week. If we were to, let's say 2 trips a day, right? If we did 2 trips a day, right, that would be 160 vehicles, right? Maybe 300 if you double it or something like that. So these are relatively modest volumes. If you think of a neighborhood street as being something under 1,000, these are relatively modest volumes. The buses, 24 buses a day, but conversely, if you compare it, maybe let's say to the pedestrian crossing right in front of Memorial Union, which to me is always busy. That's always busy. Well, you know, we have many more pedestrians there, and we have 100 buses a day going through there. So you know, buses and pedestrians can coexist, but we want to make the best environment for both, right? And we, because Vision Zero says that even when people make errors, we want them to live, right? And so we should be designing that way, correct? So.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally feasible in this case, given the volumes. I think the loading bays on University Avenue is also a really, really good idea because of, I mean, both for Hawthorne Court, but also for the BRT bus lanes. I mean, you have to acknowledge that people are going to be loading there. And so creating those bays, I think, is again a measure that will help with both those things. Yeah, I think that's all I had. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Harold. Bridget, you're next.
Yeah, I just wanted to build a little bit on Harold's comment about the restrooms. I think this is a great opportunity to provide publicly available potable water in that area. You know, it's a part of the city where, you know, there are a lot of restaurants, and you'd think that it would be easy to get, you know, drinking water, but it really isn't if you're not going in with the intent to buy something. So, you know, having potable water, water fountain jug fillers that are available both maybe inside the lobby there and also from the outside of the building, understanding that could, you know, increase pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic, but you know, it's a piece that I think the city needs to do, you know, do a better job with in providing water for folks out walking and biking. That's it. Thanks.
I think our architects are still listening, so hopefully they write that down.
Okay, somebody taking notes on that, because that's come up in other areas as well. So somebody hopefully is noting that down. Bridget, did you have something else? Are you good?
No,
I'm good. I'll lower my hand. Thanks, Anne.
Okay, great. Harold, you're next.
I think Bill had his hand up before me.
Oh, I show you as next, but I don't know. Zoom, I didn't think Zoom lied to me, Harold.
All right. Well, anyway, I remembered 1/2 more questions. So you said, Tom, you said you talked to Badger Bus and to Coach USA. Have there also been conversations? You mentioned Greyhound, or I guess now they're owned by Flixbus. Is there any thought of them moving back to having downtown stops at the terminal? And part of the reason why I'm asking is 3 bus bays. Is that enough, or 3 plus kind of sort of 2 on the street?
Yeah, we did have actually a larger meeting with Flixbus, which actually I think Flix purchased Greyhound, right? You know, it's so they were there. Coach USA, Greyhound was there, so we had Flix and Greyhound and Badger. We did not get Jefferson; they just didn't come. So they gave us their opinions on how they like things allocated. You know, Coach USA likes undesignated stalls. Greyhound likes designated stalls. You know, I was hoping the meeting we'd walk out of the meeting with a happy consensus and we'd all, you know, be singing. But they all have a little bit different idea. So I think what we'll have to just do is say this is how we think is most fair. You know, rather than that, when you have 3 stalls, it's hard to designate something for a certain company, right? On the other hand, if a bus company comes through and the 3 are filled, right, we want a place for them. I think maybe one other item is that if a bus needs to stage for like an hour to an hour and a half, it'd be nice to find a different place for them to stage rather than taking up a stall. So, you know, it's not perfect. Commonly, I guess what happens now is when more space is needed, these carriers, they buy meter hoods and then they close off metered parking, and that's where they park their buses. And so we have metered parking in the area, and that could be a further overflow, you might say, if needed.
I guess there's no space in the alley or in Hawthorne Court to have.
No, we really want that to be because if someone, the Uber driver is going to be there, and pretty soon everyone's going to be there. It's going to be and so we want to keep that here. I'm going to say, wouldn't that be a great problem to have? Where we have 5 providers. Right now, we have 2 providers serving this.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. Tom is a user of intercity bus as recently as Monday.
Good.
I find it very interesting and useful. And I had some observations and questions. This is something that the city is going to, it's like, and you just touched on it a little bit, the city is going to provide this, but it's up to the bus companies if they want to use it or not. And I guess, have you investigated or found out anything why the city of Rockford built a intercity bus terminal and Coach USA does not use it?
Yeah,
they were there and then they pulled out. They do not use that anymore.
Yeah.
They're go back to their old facility. And I guess that kind of is a fickle of we build it, but will they come? I guess is really the question. And I hope they do, but it'll be interesting. I guess if they choose to do something else, it's their prerogative.
Yeah, that's why we want to do this in partnership with them, because they really can. Legally, they are able to load at any designated bus stop we have anywhere, and so they don't have to use this.
Right.
Right now, our current discussions with them is that yes, they're willing to use this. They're willing to use it with the geometry.
Okay.
Pull through. The thing that would cause them to not use this would be if an Uber driver is parked in there.
Yeah.
Uber Eats driver is parked in there, and then that bus has to back out. Think about how hard that is.
I agree. I saw it, this last weekend. I saw the challenge that those buses when they have to back up. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So I agree, and I hope we keep it reserved strictly for intercity bus and nobody else.
And that's what we fully intend to do. But in order for us to do that, we have to provide another option, right? That's why we're looking at this booking base.
Oh, yes, I agree. And I right now, what they're doing on Lake Street is because of the number of buses that they were for the Thanksgiving break, they were staging buses on Dayton Street, but they were also staging buses out at the I think the Alliance Center, and because they just did not want to have too many buses in that city. So I think they're good partners. And I think they'll work with them, and if they'll work with us, and we'll work with them. I think is how that will happen. I supported the having the restrooms, and I agreed with Bridget of having water, but security is always a concern. And will this be a city maintained facility then, as far as the cleaning the restrooms and so forth?
Yeah, we have to figure that out. We could turn this over to a provider, and they do that, or we could pay a fee or charge a fee that basically pays for that service.
Yeah.
Right now, for instance, Dutch Mill, we get roughly about $50,000 a year to plow the snow at Dutch Mill and empty it.
And I think 50,000, that's probably not going to be enough to maintain restrooms and keep the facility clean. And that's the key. I mean, people won't use it if it's not clean. I think that's their biggest. We want people to use intercity bus. And the other only in passing, I completely agree with what the concept of Hawthorne Court and parallel parking with the buses. But I think, if and when we get intercity train, that could impact this facility ultimately in the long run.
Yeah, it could. And you could make that.
I mean, it could complement. I mean, they could use both facilities. They could use both facilities. Yeah.
At 5 o'clock or 6:30. Yeah, it will. And there's some thoughts that it would be nice if they were connected, as they are in Milwaukee. The train station serves is connected to the intercity buses, but in some ways also the trains are a little bit competing for the same market as the buses, right?
Well, I mean, I took the bus down to Amtrak and it worked great. So I fully support this project, and I think we should definitely go ahead and move ahead on this. I think it's a long time in getting, and I hope with all of the challenges with the air rights and everything, but I think that something that city should take that risk and move ahead with this project. Thanks.
Hey, Robbie, you're next.
Yeah, I'm just going to make this really brief. I think that, the trade-offs that we've made are very good. Nothing is perfect, but I'm absolutely thrilled that we are going to have a place to shelter while waiting for the bus in downtown that is close to transit, that is walking distance to amenities, to the campus, to buses, transit buses, to things that people want to go to, like State Street, the Capitol, and the university. And I just want to point out, it's not just students that use that bus. I use it all the time. Yeah. And I have family in Chicago. I have a car, but I do not want to park in Chicago. There is no way. And I know people who actually commute on the Badger bus to Milwaukee for business. They can get work done. So the idea that it's just students is way not true at all. There's a lot of business people who go between Madison and Milwaukee all the time. So I'm just glad that we're going to have something, but having services, a place to sit in the winter, a place to be sheltered from the wind and the rain, and a place to use the bathroom. Honest to God, I can't tell you how many times I've caught an early bus and been running around looking for a bathroom before I got on the bus. Mm-hmm. So we need that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Robbie. Denise, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. The same. I'm very excited about this. Non-drivers, again, use intercity bus, and, for non-drivers with disabilities who may be sensitive to weather conditions or even just disoriented, if you're waiting outside the Union is a horrific experience. And even down on Lake Street, if you have limited ability to use your senses, because there's so much street noise and people that, kind of echolocating where the bus is very difficult. So having a space where the buses would be, the ability to go inside and use a bathroom, it could be incredibly helpful. I also really appreciate that the design took into account the concerns that were raised about Hawthorne Court and pedestrians. I, as you describe it, I would feel safe navigating that. And I'm really glad that there's not going to be 4 entrances to the parking ramp on Lake Street. I use that corridor as a pedestrian quite a bit. And even walking by 2 entrances and exits on the current Lake Street, ramp is anxiety producing, wondering if the drivers coming in and coming out are seeing me. So I can't imagine doing 4 entrances. That feels like a pedestrian nightmare, frankly. The one question I had or thought I had is, I heard Cleo say that they've tried to have an audience with the developers and the city, and they haven't gotten that. And so I was checking to see if that was accurate, and if so, having an opportunity to sit with them, I think, is just good practice because they are an impacted community. So if that hasn't happened, I'd like to see that happen.
Yeah, Nate, do you want to go ahead and comment on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for the opportunity. And I'm not sure if Cleo's still on, but it sounds like maybe she didn't have the opportunity to participate in some of the CANA discussions. I just went back and checked my calendar, and we had the opportunity to meet with the entire CANA group on August 24th. And then we also had the opportunity to meet with a smaller CANA steering committee on November 3rd. And then following that November 3rd meeting, we provided CANA on November 6th of a comprehensive response to all of their concerns in collaboration with the city team, which is actually linked to the CANA steering committee letter that Cleo referenced in Legistar. So there has been a significant amount of collaboration to date. So hopefully that addresses the question.
And the city was in those meetings as well. David, I saw your name on one of those meeting minutes. So I believe, Denise, both the city and the development team were involved in various meetings. Okay, great. Did you have other questions, Denise?
Nope, I'm all good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Other comments or questions? I have a couple, but I want to wait till everybody else has had their chance. I just want to say I'm another one who doesn't drive to Chicago and take the bus to Chicago, and having a place to wait indoors and a bathroom would be greatly appreciated. So I'm really excited about that. There's been a lot of discussion about the safety of Hawthorne Court. And I've read all of the material that was put in Legistar and listened to everything that everybody said tonight. And it sounds to me like both the city and the developer have really focused on improving traffic flow and pedestrian safety on Hawthorne Court, so that after this development, it appears to me that Hawthorne Court would be safer than it is today. And I'm interested in hearing from Nate and from the city with regard to that comment.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. One of the members that participated in the CANA steering committee meeting was the general manager for the Liquid Lounge. And I mean, some of their concerns around maintaining their emergency exits, how narrow that 2-foot strip of sidewalk is, the traffic congestion, especially getting out of Hawthorne Court back onto University. I really do feel, I agree with what you said, and that the future condition of Hawthorne Court is going to be a much better experience, both for vehicles and pedestrians. Like Tom said, it's not perfect, but I think it's the best solution given all of the variables and constraints we're trying to deal with.
And Tom, from your point of view, it sounds to me like it's going to be safer. And would you? I'm assuming you agree with that.
Yeah, I think the two-way traffic flow right now is really quite a detriment. And there is not a refuge for pedestrians. There will be slightly more traffic, I'm going to say, but the numbers are still quite low. I mean, they're really about a quarter of what a neighborhood street would see. So, if this was a neighborhood street, we would have no concerns at all. We would say this is very lightly traveled. So,
and Tom, I don't think you mentioned this in your presentation, but just as a frame of reference, based on the pedestrian counts, during peak demand, there's 12 times more pedestrians that utilize Lake Street as compared to Hawthorne Court, just as a frame of reference.
Yeah. Okay. And both Francis Street and Lake Street are just 200 feet away from each other, Hawthorne Court. So there's, we're trying to activate Lake Street. It'll have a wide pedestrian way. That's 200 feet from Hawthorne Court.
Okay. David, go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I have been with the parking utility a number of years, and I have most of the comments regarding pedestrian safety were kind of around intoxicated students. And I understand that kids party when they go to college, but I have physically worked down there on the weekends during the peak periods and during bar time rushes. And I feel very strongly that the development plan only enhances their safety. I'm not aware of any vehicle versus pedestrian incidents thus far. And granted, I'm not made aware of everything, but I think the plan development only enhances the pedestrian safety. That's why I support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody have any other questions or comments? I don't see any hands. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion. Bill.
I certainly will make a motion for approval of, and I don't have the agenda right in front of me. So
just approve it. We just recommend approval.
We're recommending to the council for approval.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Robbie, is that a second?
That is a second.
Okay, Bill, did you wish to speak to your motion at all?
No, I think we have the last 10 minutes. I think everybody has agreed that this is going to be far better alternative than any of the other proposals that were prepared in the preliminaries. And I think this is well thought out, and it will make enhancements to this area. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Any discussion? Okay, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no, abstain, or wishes a roll call vote. Please raise your hand if you do. Okay, seeing none. It passes unanimously. And now we need a motion to adjourn. And first, I want to thank everybody. We had a lot of important topics. I mean, we always have important topics, but some pretty major things on our agenda tonight. So thanks to everybody for coming and participating. And we need a motion to adjourn. Bill.
Motion to adjourn.
And Robbie, a second.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.